The premise of How I Met Your Mother is one man's search for love and all the lessons that he had to learn along the way to be ready to receive love. And when it comes to this show, I feel like it has a certain philosophy to it. So I wanted to explore all of Ted's main relationships on the show to try to see what the show is trying to say about dating and love and marriage and commitment. So let's start from the beginning.
Tonight, we will make a memory that will never be tarnished.
Victoria is the first relationship of Ted's that we see on the show. So he meets her because he goes to Claudia's and Stuart's wedding, and at the wedding, he sees Victoria across the room, and it's a love at first sight kind of moment. They strike up a conversation, they start flirting. Victoria tells him that she does not hook up with guys at weddings, and she decides that maybe perhaps tonight they just have a magical night together. They don't exchange information, they don't share their names, they don't give each other's phone numbers. That way, this moment will always remain magical. He agrees to this, and this whole thing is very reminiscent of Before Sunrise, which is a film by Richard Linklater. Came out in 1995, and it's just so romantic. And it's about two people who get off the train in Vienna and just walk around all day, and they fall in love just from very basic conversation. And this is kind of similar to what Victoria and Ted end up doing. They have an amazing night together. They have a lot of fun where they try to steal the bouquet. She tap dances, she does a cartwheel, he plays the piano. So they find a way to just have a ton of fun just with each other, and they don't even care about the wedding. And at the end of it all, they separate, and Ted doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know who he is. And it's important to note that at this point, Ted has been aggressively chasing Robin, that he wanted to take Robin to Claudia and Stuart's wedding, and he was super excited to have her there, but she was offered an anchor role that night, and so she couldn't go. So it's important to consider the fact that Ted is basically on the rebound. He's been chasing Robin up to this point, and then Victoria enters his life. And once they start dating, it's very romantic between them. And for us as the audience, it's played for laughs. We're supposed to be mocking and laughing at how romantic and over the top Ted and Victoria are based on how Marshall and Lily react. And on the podcast, How We Made Your Mother, Josh Radnor has said that it was kind of whiplash for him to go from a truly romantic kind of a scenario where he and Victoria really bond and it's really beautiful at the wedding, and then it jumps into mockery.
Could you hold my hair back? I think I'm gonna hurl.
But of course, this is a sitcom and they do have to do things for laughs. And I think it's also really beautiful how at the wedding, they are able to bond in a way that feels simple and it's not too over the top. It's just two people getting to know each other. And Ted does do a grand romantic gesture for Victoria, but it still feels very understated. After the wedding, he realizes that he must find her. And so he searches, he calls Claudia, he calls Stuart. He finds out that she was the baker, and he shows up at her bakery and he's wearing his bleach-stained sweatshirt and his clothing that he always wears at home, and he just comes there and it's very romantic because she's super happy that he found her as well. And it's that kind of romantic moment that feels tailored to her rather than this grandiose gesture of dozens of flowers or an orchestra. It's simple and it's cute because it works for Victoria. And I have to admit that when I first watched the show, I really didn't like Victoria. And it wasn't because I was rooting for Ted and Robin, but the whole thing with Victoria of being overly romantic, their whole extreme, like soul-searching kind of moment on the couch together, and the whole idea of let's not find out anything about each other, let's just have this magical romantic night, just felt so over the top, saccharine and sweet and overly romantic. And so it came off as cheesy to me. And I think that that's why I didn't really like Victoria that much. I didn't hate her as a character, but it just felt like it was just too much. But on rewatches, I have to say that given what I know what's coming and appreciating who Ted is as a character, she is perfect for Ted in that moment. And it makes sense for Ted. Ted likes the cheesiness. He likes the romance. She works for him. And she is someone who can sit on the couch with him and stare into his eyes and ask him, what makes you cry? So that works for Ted. It might not work for everybody, but I think that this show does try to be over the top sometimes because it tries to bring up the comedy. But in hindsight, I do think that the way that this played out in terms of how romantic it is works for Ted as a character. And so in the first season, there isn't really anything bad that one can say about Victoria. She's very sweet to Robin, even though Robin is continuously mean to Victoria. I mean, she's very passive aggressive towards her, and Victoria just kind of sweeps this to the side. Victoria finds out that Ted used to really like Robin and that he re-returned for her. And even though Victoria is upset by this, she takes it in stride. And she even plays a little prank on Ted by putting a fake vomit toy on his doorstep, showing the fact that she's willing to joke about it. She's willing to get past it. So she has become a bigger person in the fact that she tries to bond with Robin, even though Robin is passive aggressive towards her. And she was nice to Robin at the wedding. And she's just very good for Ted. And we also see that Victoria tries to bond with Lily by offering to look at wedding dresses because she's in the industry. So she really tries to bond with the group, and the group does seem to like her. And then 2 months after dating, Victoria gets offered a donut fellowship in Germany that's supposed to be a year. And so she's considering whether or not she should take it. And she really likes Ted, but at the same time, they've only been dating for 2 months and doesn't make sense for her to put her career on the back burner for someone that she's only known for 2 months. Ted is facing the same challenge where he really likes her, but at the same time, he can't really ask her to stay because he doesn't really know her that well. And so what ends up happening is something that the show does quite often, which is where after Victoria has a conversation with Robin, she walks away with this feeling of, I want to make this work, because Robin kind of comes around and she says Ted is a great guy. And so Victoria thinks, perhaps I should stay for him because he's worth it. And then Ted walks away with this feeling of, I don't know Victoria well enough, so perhaps she should go. And then when they actually meet up, Victoria says that she has to go to Germany and Ted asks her to stay. And then they decide to have a great day together. They spend all day together and it's great. He walks her to the airport and both of them, because they don't want to leave each other, they run towards each other saying, let's try to make long distance work. So it's clear that they're both kind of pushing and fighting for this relationship. And then everything goes south once she goes off to Germany. So once she's in Germany and she's abroad for about a month, she has sent him like 3 care packages. He has sent her 0. And he starts talking to Robin about the fact that she's super far away and it's not really working. We see that he even falls asleep while talking to her. So it's clear that she's putting in a lot more effort than he is. And then she writes him a letter saying we have to talk. And Ted interprets this as she's going to break up with me. And so we know how all of this ends. So Ted ends up going to Robin's place because she calls him at 2 o'clock in the morning. And when Victoria calls, she picks up the phone and Robin is on the other end. So then Victoria finds out that Ted was going to cheat. And he does cheat because he lies to Robin, saying that he did break up with Victoria. They hook up and then he and Victoria end up breaking up over the phone. So up to this point, Ted and Victoria seem kind of great together, and it's really Ted who starts screwing up once Victoria goes abroad. But before that, they are super into each other. It seems like they want to spend all their time together. They don't want to leave each other. They really want to make it work. And Victoria even says that Ted might be the one. So she's completely infatuated with him. But then it's very clear that Ted always had one foot out the door.
I had that other phone, and it was good. But I think the whole time a little part of me wanted this phone instead. This phone feels right.
So he tells Robin in his own metaphorical way that even though he liked Victoria, he was always secretly hoping and always wanting Robin. So from his end, he wasn't all in, even though Victoria seemed to be all in. And as soon as Victoria's gone, she's putting in the effort and Ted is not. And so it's nice to see that they're actually breaking up at the end, even though it's kind of a disservice to Victoria at the fact that all we're getting is a phone call and Ted had already cheated at this point.
I loved you.
Did you?
Yes.
The story of Victoria could have ended in season 1, and I think it would have preserved this character and preserved this relationship dynamic. But unfortunately, we get a second part to this saga, which happens in season 7. And this is where Victoria goes from great to kind of bad. So Ted runs into Victoria at the architect's ball and he comes up to her and he apologizes to her.
I'm really, really sorry.
And Victoria says that it's not necessary, which is kind of odd. So last we left off, he cheated on her and the relationship had already been declining by the fact that he stopped putting in an effort because he was falling asleep on the phone. He wasn't sending her any care packages, even though she was. And then he blatantly just cheats on her. And here she is saying, It's all good. Don't worry about it. And making things worse is that Robin is Ted's date at the architect's ball.
I stole your boyfriend. That was like crazy.
But Victoria is reacting very calmly, which, good for her. That's great. But then Ted is like, let me wash your dishes. I want to make amends. I'm very sorry for what happened. And she lets him, which is her choice. So he goes to wash her dishes and he says that he's not trying anything. He's not making a move. He just wants to make amends. And I call bullshit on that. Why would you travel all the way just to wash your dishes because you just feel bad? But anyway, this is where the writers kind of help Ted out. So we find out that Victoria is getting engaged and she feels bad about the fact that Ted came all the way over to wash her dishes. And we could tell that at this point, Ted is kind of sad and disappointed. So clearly he wasn't just trying to make amends, and he is sad about the fact that Victoria is about to get engaged to a man named Klaus. And this is where the writers make Victoria look kind of bad because Klaus was one of her classmates when she was in Germany, and Ted asks her when did they start dating, and they start dating the day after Ted and Victoria broke up. So it is clear that Victoria was cheating emotionally while she was with Ted. And okay, so perhaps maybe some people will see this as not as bad, but I think that emotionally cheating is equally as bad. And perhaps one could explain this away by the fact that she wasn't cheating and Klaus was purely just a friend. And it really just turned romantic literally the day after. But, that's not what the writers are trying to convey. And it's a good way to explain why Victoria didn't need Ted's apology, because she also felt guilty herself that she wasn't being completely faithful to him at the same time. And so they both messed up in that relationship. And so then Ted and Victoria end up having a romantic moment. And this is where we get to an interesting point where Ted says that he regrets what happened 6 years ago.
Okay, I will never stop regretting it because what we had meant that much to me.
Also, bullshit.
I had that other phone, and it was good. But I think the whole time a little part of me wanted this phone instead. This phone feels right.
The moment that he thought that perhaps maybe she wanted to break up is when he decided to cheat. So it took him no time. And even the whole time that when he was with Victoria, he still had it out for Robin because that's what Ted actually said. And when she was abroad, Ted didn't seem to be as invested. So did Victoria mean that much to him? Or is this something where he's just overcome with his own romantic feeling again? But Ted is very effective at being overly romantic. And also Josh Radnor is great at this role and being romantic, and he's very convincing. So Victoria and Ted have a romantic moment. They end up kissing, which makes Victoria look really bad. And after they kiss, and this is another moment again where I feel like the show seems like it's going to go in one direction and then it pivots really quick. So it seems like Victoria is falling back in with Ted. But as soon as she kisses him, she says, I realize I have to marry Klaus. He walks her to the bus stop and he asks her, why not? I don't want you to get on this bus. Please be with me. And the way that he asks is just so romantic.
What would our lives be right now if we just held on? Would I have still run into you at this party tonight, or would we have been there together?
And this is where Victoria says something that's very critical, which is the fact that all of Ted's relationships have failed for one reason, and that's Robin. And Robin is the reason why she's getting on this bus, and as long as Robin is around, it's never going to work, because from her perspective, Ted cheated on Victoria with Robin, and then the next time that Victoria sees him, Robin is his date, and she also knows that they hang out all the time as friends. It's just not a healthy dynamic. But I also don't think it's fair to say that Robin is the reason why all of Ted's relationships failed. At this point, Ted has had a few failed relationships, including Stella and Zoey. And with Stella, she did leave him at the altar. Yes, partially it's tied to the fact that he invited Robin to the wedding, but it's not really tied too much to Robin as it is tied to Tony. So I don't know if it's fair to entirely blame that breakup on Robin.
I love Stella. She's the one. If you really feel that way, I guess it's a good thing you're not coming to the wedding after all.
That even if Robin attended the wedding, Stella could have still married Ted and they could have still been together. So it was Stella's decision to leave. In that case, it was Stella's ex that played a bigger role. And then with Zoey, I don't think that Robin played any role in the breakup between Ted and Zoey. But when it comes to Victoria, most certainly Robin is the biggest obstacle.
Where should we go? Your place? My place? We could go on my honeymoon. Just kidding.
So the story could have ended there with Victoria and Ted at the bus stop, but it doesn't. And this is where Victoria goes from kind of bad to terrible, or just so much worse. Basically, in season 7, Robin points out to Ted that Ted claims that he's looking for love, but he's really not. He's going after all these women who are unavailable. So he went after Robin, even though she was emotionally unavailable. He went after Stella, even though Stella had a kid and was still in love with her ex. Although that one's kind of unfair. I feel like Ted had no way of knowing that Stella was still in love with her ex, and the fact that Stella has a kid shouldn't really be a sign for the fact that he shouldn't go for her. In fact, if Ted is who he says he is and he's looking for love, marriage, and children, it would be great to go after a woman who has a child, is so ready to settle down. I mean, she has a house and a kid already. All she needs is a husband. They can go ahead and have more kids. So I don't think that Robin pointing out Stella is a sign that Ted is going after the wrong women. He really had no way of knowing that Stella was still in love with her ex, and we really don't find out anything about that until they're engaged. And Robin points out that he went after Zoey, even though Zoey was married. So Robin does have a point in the fact that he tends to go for some of these women who are unavailable. And she says that he has to make his own destiny. He should go for Victoria because he shouldn't just sit around and wait for destiny to happen. And this is where Ted holds baby Marvin, and he realized that he's nowhere close to where Lily and Marshall are in their life. So he decides to call Victoria. And Victoria shows up in a wedding dress. And she says that last year in the fall, she was ready to leave Klaus for Ted because she really wants to be with Ted, but she hesitated because of Robin. And yet she's still sitting there, and she says that she has a car parked outside and she's ready to drive off into the sunset. And so Ted decides to drive off into the sunset with Victoria, and as they're driving, again, this show does this quite a lot when you pay attention, is that he wants to go and have this happy future with her. And as they're driving, he realizes that he can't do that because he knows what it's like to be left at the altar, and it's just wrong. So as they're driving, he's like, no, you have to go back. But then again, they keep driving, and he drives past the church because he doesn't want to lose her again. And he thinks about all the times that he's lost her before, and he doesn't want it to happen. And so it ends with Ted deciding that, nope, I do want to be with her. I don't want this to end. Let's drive off into the sunset. And as they're driving, Ted finds out that Victoria didn't even leave a note. And this is where she just comes off in a terrible, terrible light, because not only did she not leave a note, she suggests sending a text message. And then when she decides to write a note after Ted convinces her, her notes are just awful.
Klaus, there is no easy way to tell you why I won't be marrying you today. Have a great summer, Victoria. And
then when Ted decides to leave a note, he runs into Klaus, who's also trying to run away from the wedding. And when he goes back to driving with Victoria, he wonders, why is Klaus leaving this wonderful woman? So he goes to talk to Klaus, and Klaus says that even though Victoria is wonderful, she's not the one. And this is where Klaus gives a very beautiful speech about love, about the one, about this destiny, this idea of the perfect person. And even though it sounds absolutely beautiful, what he says, I think, is just horseshit and a very dangerous message.
Lebenslanger Schüttelschutz is not something that develops over time. It is something that happens instantaneously.
He says that love is not something that develops over time, it's instantaneous, as if initial infatuation is an absolute must, that it's a requirement, that love cannot be built. And I just think that it kind of sends the wrong message, and we have a contrast with Lily and Marshall in reality. And even though Lily and Marshall are shown in that clip, I think that what Lily and Marshall display is this idea that you have to choose every single day, that love is built over time, and that this initial infatuation is just that, it's infatuation. But after that, after you get past that point, love is about choosing the individual every single day and building upon that. And it goes back to the point that Lily and Marshall made about the fact that once you get after that honeymoon phase, then the real magic starts. It's about the simple moments. It's about the arguments. It's about the times that you are struggling together and you get past it, and that's how you get stronger together. And that is how love is built and developed. And so Klaus asks Ted if he ever felt this way, and Ted says, I think so.
You have to think about it. You have not felt it.
But back to Victoria. So despite what Klaus says, Ted starts dating Victoria, and from the beginning of this particular relationship, of this point, this is a joke. So their relationship just starts off as very comical and ridiculous. And this version of Victoria is very different from the Victoria we saw in the first season. So we see that Klaus moves in with them because he lost his job and he got evicted. And I love the actor who plays Klaus. I'm forgetting his name, but he's very funny. And I do like him as an addition, but this whole dynamic is just meant purely for laughs. And this relationship is meant purely as a joke. Because Ted swoops in as the big hero saying, yes, Klaus can move in. Of course, then he starts to regret it, as most people would, because Klaus shows up, he stops wearing clothing, he brings his ferrets, and he walks around just naked in the house, and obviously it's intrusive. And Victoria is upset about this for some reason, for the fact that Ted offered, but now he's backtracking on this. Although I do have to say that by the end of the episode with Klaus, I do love how they're all sitting on the couch, watching and having a good time. So them as a throuple, so Ted, Klaus, and Victoria, I like to see it. And I feel like that as a comedic dynamic could have worked. That's a sitcom in and of itself, of Ted, Klaus, and Victoria living together with the ferrets. But anyway, they get past it, they find peace with Klaus, and then we see that Ted competes with Robin about how quickly his relationship is progressing. So at this point, Robin is dating Nick, Ted is dating Victoria, and they're competing to show who is happier in their relationship. And we see that Ted even RSVPs to a wedding with Victoria that's 6 months from now, showing that either he's competing really strongly with Robin or the fact that he's more willing to take those types of steps with another person. At this point, Victoria is practically living with him, and so they've gotten much closer. But we also see more elements or more sides to Victoria's character, like, for example, the fact that she's a slob, which was never presented before, and so again, plays up this fact of the fact that this time around, Victoria seems more like a joke than an actual real relationship. So she's turned into a more comedic character because she's super messy, and the whole thing with Klaus. And then she becomes very intense about getting married, which in some ways is fair because she left Ted for Klaus, who she was about to marry. And so she really wants to get married. But then again, we don't know how long they've been dating this time. So they only dated for about 2 months and 1 month long distance a while back when they were in their 20s. And now they've only been dating, a couple of months. And the other somewhat comical element that's introduced, but also is kind of absurd, is the fact that Victoria's father expects Ted to pay for her wedding because he's the quote unquote reason that the wedding didn't happen, which is an absolute lie. And it feels kind of cruel, kind of on Victoria's part, for the fact that this is a thing that's happening because Ted is paying back in installments for that wedding, which is stupid because Klaus was also running away from the wedding. All right, so back to the main point. So Victoria keeps dropping hints at the fact that she wants to get married, and Ted doesn't pick up on that, and Lily and Marshall have to point it out to him. And this is another frustrating element of the new Victoria character, at the fact that she's being very passive-aggressive about it, dropping hints rather than actually having a conversation about it like an adult. But to give Victoria some credit, there is a good explanation for why maybe she would be pushing for a wedding, which is the fact that she doesn't feel completely secure in the relationship. She doesn't feel like it's 100% all in, that there's something that's holding him back. So Ted decides to take the hint, and Victoria comes home to dozens of roses and to candles, and he proposes. And Victoria says yes. But after she says yes, she tells him that she doesn't want him to be friends with Robin. And this upsets Ted. He says that he doesn't love Robin, that they're just friends, and that he really wants to be Victoria, and that really Robin shouldn't stop them because he doesn't feel that way about her now, that he has proposed to Victoria. It's clear that he wants to be with her. And Victoria says, okay, fine, maybe you don't feel that way today, but what about tomorrow? What about a year from now? So you had those feelings, and those feelings could come back, and you guys have a very close relationship. And I think that Victoria has a very good point. And I do like how in this particular scene, Victoria does present it that she doesn't hate Robin. And it's shown the fact that she kind of feels stuck in the fact that, like, she knows that's not Robin's fault necessarily. And she doesn't want to be the kind of woman who gives Ted an ultimatum, but she's just put in this position because she sees what's happening. And I do think that it's a tough scenario, and I am inclined to side with Victoria in this particular case. And I do think that each scenario is different. There are situations where two people have truly become friends. They haven't been together in a very long time. There are no feelings there. And at that point, it becomes more about jealousy and paranoia rather than a practical reason for ending a friendship. So there are many people who are able to maintain long relationships with their exes and it's not in any way a hurdle to their current relationship because that dynamic has changed. But that's not the scenario that we see here. And that's what Lily points out as well, that when Ted goes to talk to Lily and Marshall, Marshall sides with Ted saying, yeah, it's kind of unreasonable. And Lily says, well, she does have a point. This is not a relationship that ended years ago. If Ted and Robin truly ended at the end of season 2 and they had completely moved on, then perhaps Victoria's request may seem slightly more unreasonable, even though, again, it is Robin that caused their breakup in the first place. Ted cheated on Victoria with Robin, which hurts, and he's still friends with her, so she does have a very good reason. But on top of that, Ted told Robin that he loves her earlier that year. It's literally just a few months ago that Ted told Robin that he loves her, that he wants to be with her. And since their breakup in season 2, there have been numerous times where they sort of backslid, or there's been implication that there's still maybe something there. So it really just makes sense so much from Victoria's side, and she doesn't even know any of this information. So for this particular scenario, this ultimatum of her saying you can't be friends with Robin kind of makes sense. But I also think that if you have to ask a partner, then it's a sign that maybe there are already issues in the relationship, that if you have so much distrust or you feel like your partner loves somebody else, so much so that you have to tell them that they can't see them, then I already think that the relationship is not doomed, but it's a serious red flag, and it shows that there's a lack of trust in this relationship, and it's already a major issue. But another element to this, and where I think Victoria is presented kind of not in the best way, is the fact that she pushes him for marriage. So she pushes him for an engagement. She keeps hinting at it. So not only does she not talk to him as a mature adult and bring up marriage in a real way, but she drops hints at it. And then once he actually proposes, that's when she brings up the fact that she doesn't want him to see Robin. So she waited until she got the ring to then tell him, end it with Robin. And so this feels like the kind of conversation that has to happen beforehand, or at least brought up beforehand. So it just feels like a bait and trap kind of scenario where it's like, I'm waiting for you to propose and I'm pushing for you to propose. And as soon as you do it, I'm going to put my foot down and say, stop seeing your friend. Whereas I think that that's the conversation that should happen before you push for an engagement. And at the very end of this, once again, we have a bait and switch that the writers do, where Ted comes away from his conversation with Lily and Marshall saying, Victoria could be the mother of my future children. I know that Robin won't be. So it seems like Ted is walking away from this thinking, I will choose Victoria. And then when he's sitting down at the bar and he's going to talk to Robin and he's going to talk to Victoria, it's shown that he actually ended up choosing Robin. So it's funny how we see this play out quite a few times where the conversation ends and it's suggested that they're going to make one choice. And again, we see this where Ted walks away saying, Victoria could be the love of my life. She could be the mother of my future children. And then he sits down and he tells her, this is going to end. I cannot end my friendship with Robin. I hope you can understand. I hope that we could still be together, even though I don't want to end this friendship. And Victoria, very reasonably, says,
I really hope you get her someday.
She cannot be with Ted if Robin is still around. And I think that makes a lot of sense, given their particular history. And also given how things end up playing out. So I think that Victoria is right, based on how the show progresses. So to sum up their relationship with Victoria, I think that season 1, even though initially I wasn't that into her, I like season 1 Victoria a lot. I think that it was great and it was very romantic, very beautiful, and it worked for Ted. And then subsequently, every single appearance that she comes in, she just gets worse and worse, and ultimately the writers turned her into a joke by the end. And the fan theory is that the writers didn't want everyone to hope that it was Victoria or wish that Victoria would be the mother. So they did this so that they can sort of destroy the idea that Victoria could be the one. And so it makes sense from the writer's perspective, because in season 1, if the show would have been canceled in one season, Victoria would have been the mother. But after it was continued, that plot line was killed. So as soon as it was renewed for a second season, it was established that Victoria was not going to be the mother. So if she were to come back, they had to ruin the character.
Ted, I only have time for one most important person in my life, and that's Lucy.
So then we get Stella, and Stella is Ted's third relationship. So Ted gets a butterfly tattoo. He wants to get it removed because he got it when he was drunk. And he's in the waiting room, and across the room, he sees Stella. And once again, it's a love at first sight kind of moment where he's infatuated. And as soon as he's in the room with her, he puts on the moves. So he becomes very charismatic, very charming, and she does go along with him. So their banter in the beginning is very light and cute, and I kind of like it. So it goes to show that they're both funny and they kind of click together. She invites him to the movies because they talk about what's the worst movie ever made. And Ted thinks it's a date, but she's not allowed to legally date him. But I also think it's kind of odd the fact that she invited her patient to the movies at the first session. So from her end, it's already a little bit odd. But anyway, so at the first session, Ted tells her that after he's done being her patient, he's going to ask her out. And she tells him that she's going to say no. But that doesn't stop Ted. So once he starts going to the sessions, every session he tries to do something cute. He tries to impress her. The second session, he tells her about how he worked with inner city kids. The third session, they just spend the whole time speaking completely in French. He makes her laugh hysterically. He makes her fall out of her chair. He juggles. He even gets a book, The Power of Me, which he sees in her office, and so he tries to read it in order to impress her. So he's really going out of his way to impress this woman who he barely knows. He just had initial chemistry with her. And this is one of those situations which is kind of the application of the Doppler-Dahmer effect, where if she wasn't into him, it'd be incredibly creepy, but because she's into him, it comes off as sweet. But in a real life scenario, I feel like this is kind of a risky move and kind of the potential to create a lot of discomfort and awkwardness. So when the gang talks about the platinum rule, I think there's something to it when it comes to a dynamic where money is exchanged hands. When someone is your client, your patient, your customer, they're paying you. And if they start hitting on you, that can create a very uncomfortable situation. So in this case, the way the show presents it, it's presented as very cute. She's enjoying his company, and he can tell that she's enjoying his company. They're having fun together. They're the ones who are speaking French together. They're the ones who are laughing together. But in other situations where the other person is not picking up on cues, it's a very awkward and uncomfortable situation to put someone in if you're paying them for a service and hitting on them at the same time. But in this case, she does like him, and it comes off as cute because we find out that she has a crush on him.
Little butterfly tattoo at the bottom of his back.
Can you stop talking about your other patients? I'm dying here, woman!
So at the end, when all the sessions are done and he knows that she has a crush on him, he asks her out, and she tells him, look, I have a daughter, and I only have time for one very important person in my life. He's very understanding, but then he looks back and he's like, wait a minute, she never said no. And that's where he's like, okay, she only has 2 minutes for lunch, and I'm going to create a whole 2-minute date and impress her. So he decides to create an entire 2-minute date for her where he enlists Wendy the waitress, he enlists Ranjit, he sets up all the tables, everything is already pre-cut up, they have time for a movie. So it's incredibly romantic how it's done, and it's a lot of pre-planning. So I think that this is one of those situations of the Doppler-Dahmer effect in action where the 2-minute date is very romantic because we could tell that she's into him. And then at the end of the 2-minute date, she kisses him and he says, look, I understand that you can't. And there's no pressure.
But I understand that you really don't have time right now, but if you ever do, give me a call.
This line from Ted is one of the times where he's very mature and he understands that Stella might not be able to, and he doesn't put pressure on her. Although this line is contradictory to everything that he was doing before. So he was clearly hitting on her very hard before. And then he found out that she has a child. And after finding out that she has a child, he still took the time to do this very big gesture, romantic type of date. And then he tells her, look, you don't have to do this. But some credit does go to Ted for the fact that at the end, he doesn't put pressure on her to go out with him. That after that date, he does make it clear that he understands that she might not be able to, and he gives her the space, and he says that she can reach out to him. So the 2-minute date happens in episode 13, and then we don't hear about Stella until episode 17, where Ted says, please remember to invite Stella when he's referring to his birthday party. So she's not in the episode, but they are dating, and then we get to see more of their relationship. The first issue that comes up in their relationship is when they decide to sleep together, and Ted finds out that it's been 5 years for Stella because she barely dated and because she was so focused on her daughter, she didn't want to let anybody in. So for her, it's a big deal because it signifies the fact that she's letting things take their course and to become serious. And then Ted blabs it to his friends. So he tells Lily and Marshall that Stella hasn't slept with anyone for 5 years. And then Stella finds out because they talk to her about it and they kind of joke about it. Stella gets very upset about this. And I think that in this situation, I completely understand why Stella would be upset, because this feels very personal and vulnerable. And it's the kind of information which people usually feel uncomfortable and would want to keep private. And Ted knows how uncomfortable Stella was in sharing this information. I could see this type of a scenario where Stella being upset makes sense, but also she almost breaks up with him over it. And this is where Ted points out that she's waiting for and looking for an excuse to end things, that maybe this is the basis for an argument or a dispute, but maybe not a basis for breaking up. And Stella comes around, she agrees with him, and they take a massive step in their relationship when Stella introduces Lucy, her daughter, to Ted.
Come on, let's just be spontaneous. I used to dream that Tony would be spontaneous like this.
And then we get a really big issue. So Stella invites Ted to her sister's wedding, which is in 6 months. And Ted freaks out because it's 6 months away and they've only been dating for 3 months and it's too far in the future. According to Barney's rule, you can't make plans further out in the future than you've been dating the person. And with respect to Stella, Ted starts freaking out because she has a daughter. And so getting involved with her means also breaking her daughter's heart. And so he's worried that he's going to mess things up. He's worried their relationship is not going to work out. And this feels like such a massive step for him. And he starts worrying about it. And while they're sitting there, after Stella invited him to a wedding that's 6 months away, he breaks up with her, quote unquote. Or in other words, they have a fight. He thinks that they broke up, but they really didn't. And here's the big issue that I have with this scene, or just with Ted's reaction in this particular scenario. From what we know so far, Ted pursued Stella very aggressively, right? He didn't just ask her out once. He asked her out multiple times. While he was going to the sessions, he kept flirting with her. And then after being done with that, he asked her out again after finding out that she has a daughter. So it's not like this is news to him at this point. When he found out that she has a daughter, that should have been the time for him to think about it. That point when he sat down at the table with his friends and he said, well, she's a mom. That is the point where it should have clicked for him that, hey, unless you're serious, do not get involved. This means that you would have to grow up much faster. This means that you would have to be a stepfather if you're serious about this person. This means getting involved with someone who's taking care of a child who has a lot of responsibility. So if you're not ready for it, you better step away. But what does he do? He takes her out on a date, which signifies to her that this man is ready to be serious. This is a guy who knows that I have a daughter, but he wanted to pursue me anyway, which means he's ready to go the distance. So it makes sense from Stella's perspective why she would be inviting him to a wedding that's 6 months out, because this is a man who presented himself as someone who's very romantic and very ready to get involved and very ready to have a serious relationship. So for her, this is a very big deal. And Ted freaking out about going to a wedding is a, stressful situation for her. And the fact that he just breaks up with her right then and there at that table and doesn't even say it, I mean, that's a giant red flag for her. So then Ted gets into a car accident and his whole life flashes before his eyes, and he realizes that he loves Stella because Stella flashed before his eyes. He's in the hospital, and then Stella comes to the hospital to check up on him. Again, she still thinks that they just got into a fight. And then Stella finds out that they broke up, or that Ted dumped her. She gets upset again, which is very understandable. So she's coming from this perspective of, oh, I thought we just had a fight, but you broke up with me. So from her end, she's taking on a massive risk because they've only been dating for a few months. They already told each other they love each other. He tells her he wants to break up with her just because she invited him to a wedding that's 6 months out. And so she has a natural worry that, why won't this happen again? I mean, you broke up with me so easily. You could easily break up with me in the future. So they kind of split up again. And then Ted rushes to get her back. So he goes to Kitty Funland. And because he's so desperate to get her back, he proposes with a teddy bear. And Stella, seemingly overcome by the moment, or maybe because she's really into him, she says yes. Massive, massive mistake for Stella, but also a massive mistake for Ted. But then we see that they're happily engaged. They seem great. And the only issue that they have at first is the fact that they don't know each other that well. So Ted accidentally feeds her peanuts, which she's allergic to. Then they spend all night talking to each other. Then Ted makes her watch Star Wars to see if she would like it. And she lies and says that she loves it, but it's also indicative of the fact that Stella is willing to watch a movie that she doesn't like over and over again because Ted loves it. So it does show that Stella is willing to compromise on things. And then we get their third big fight, which is about New Jersey. So Stella lives in New Jersey, Ted is in Manhattan, and he gets tired of traveling back and forth because it's a long commute, so he misses out on time with his friends, and he also misses out on time with Stella. Stella tries to be a good sport about this. She invites his friends out to New Jersey, but he's still not happy about it. Then they find out that they had a miscommunication. So Ted actually thought that Stella was going to move in with him into Manhattan. And he also reacts poorly when Stella says that she's not moving.
Well, my daughter goes to school here. All of her friends are here. I've lived here my whole life. My whole family is here. This is my house. I'm on the PTA. And as of June 1st, I'm the deputy mayor.
So she has a million reasons for why she wants to stay in New Jersey, which makes sense. And Ted is reacting very poorly. He does come around by the end of the episode when he starts interacting with Lucy and he takes care of her. And the scenes with Ted and Lucy is sweet, but it also kind of makes it sad at the same time, given what happens and given their dynamic. But with respect to this particular fight, they do work it out. And then we have an intervention for Ted because everyone is worried that he doesn't know Stella that well and that he shouldn't be rushing to get married. And they're absolutely right. I think that intervention is warranted. Maybe doing intervention is a little over the top, but if you feel like a friend is making a mistake, I think there is a delicate and mature way to bring it up. And then things get even worse when Stella's sister cancels her wedding because her fiance runs off. And so Stella unilaterally says, "We'll take over the wedding for you," which makes Ted panic. Naturally, as he should be panicked because Stella didn't even ask him. And Stella says that she wants to be spontaneous and she just wants to move forward. And she wishes that her ex, Tony, was this spontaneous and would take a chance and take a risk. So this really does seem like Stella has her own issues. I feel like on a rewatch, you get an interesting perspective of who Stella is, the way that the writers present it.
Ted, I wasted years trying to get Lucy's dad to decide he was ready for this. But he never got ready for this. That's why we never got married.
And so it seems like she's pushing Ted almost as a way of compensating for the fact that she spent years waiting for one man to be ready for it. And so it seems like she almost developed a fear that everyone would get cold feet and would not rush into this, wouldn't want to do this, would always back down at the end of it. And Ted, hearing what Stella said about being spontaneous, he decides to be spontaneous, another big mistake. And then we get to the wedding, which is just 3 days later. And Ted tells Stella that Robin is coming to the wedding. Robin is flying out all the way from Japan to the wedding, and Stella gets upset that Ted invited Robin. And okay, in this scenario, I feel like I kind of side with both of them. On the one hand, I agree with Stella with the fact that if you don't want your partner's ex to be at the wedding, then I think you have a right to say that. And I think it's valid. But on Ted's side of the story, why was this not even discussed? Stella knows that Robin is part of his core friend group, that she hangs out with all of them all the time. So it's not the kind of ex that he sees once in a while. It's the kind of ex that he sees every single day that's very closely integrated into his group. So wouldn't Stella just assume that she would be invited? I mean, I get that Robin is all the way in Japan, but isn't this the kind of thing that you should bring up before the wedding? But I also see Stella's point. So I guess in a different scenario, I think that she has every right to say, please don't invite your ex to the wedding. That's perfectly valid. I just feel like this is a conversation that should have happened earlier. But then we do get a little bit of clarity, and it seems like Stella was projecting a bit. So she may have had an issue with Robin, but it was also coming from her own issues when it comes to Tony. And so Stella asks Ted to uninvite Robin. He talks to the gang, and then Barney picks up the phone and he calls Robin, but then he lies to Ted saying, well, she's already on the plane. So at this point, Ted thinks that Robin is already gone and she's off to New York, and so he cannot stop her from coming. So his best solution is to find another crisis. And so then Stella will forgive him and accept that Robin is coming to the wedding. A crisis does come up, which is when Tony refuses to drive Lucy to the wedding. And I have to say, to this point, Tony's presented as a horrible man, just like a really douchey, awful character, because the show seems to suggest that Stella had to raise Lucy on her own, right? So this is a man who fathered a child, was not ready for a relationship. Stella is a successful woman. She's working as a doctor, so she has a time-consuming job where she barely has any time, and also a full-time single mother, pining for a man who's not ready for a relationship, and he refuses to take that next step, and she spent years waiting for this guy. So this woman is taking care of her child on her own, basically. We don't know what the custody rights are here. And then this man, even though he didn't want to be with Stella, even though he's been dragging his feet for years, refuses to drive her daughter to the wedding. So he's being so petty, even though it's like, you made your choice, buddy. You didn't want to be with her. You've been dragging your feet. And then when it comes down to it, you're being such a petty asshole and you're refusing to bring the daughter. So Tony is portrayed in just an awful light. And then as soon as Ted shows up, he starts crying and being very emotional about it. So everything about Tony is a giant joke. Of course, a good way to explain this is the fact that Ted is telling his version of the story and that Tony was quite a bit different. But of course, in Ted's mind, that's how he presents Tony, because of course Tony's the villain. Anyway, so Ted decides to drive Tony and Lucy to the wedding, and then Robin shows up. Stella gets upset because she sees Tony and Robin, and then Stella says, I'm gonna talk to Robin, you talk to Tony. And even up to this point, at least Stella is trying to be somewhat reasonable, and she's saying, okay, I don't like this, let's try to resolve this. I will tell Robin, I'll make myself the villain, and you can make me the villain when talking to Tony. And then Ted refuses, and he still chooses to talk to Robin. And even he says, flashing forward to the future, that if he just went ahead and spoke to Tony, things could have been very different. But no, he had to talk to Robin. And as a result, Stella talks to Tony, and then Stella has feelings for Tony, and so they run off together, so Ted is left at the altar. And even though Ted created a bit of a mess with this, I think that there's still no justification for what Stella did. I think it's incredibly cruel and rude and just mean to leave someone at the altar. And even though Ted did kind of create this scenario, it doesn't mean that she has a right to just leave and abandon the wedding. What he did wasn't egregious, it was pretty bad, but what she did was absolutely egregious. And it also kind of makes her spineless, because she went back to a man who refused to be with her for years, who dragged his feet for years, who then became very petty and refused to bring their child to her wedding, which I think is incredibly petty and shows what kind of character he is. And despite all of that, when he says, hey, I'm ready, she drops everything and decides, I want to be with him. So it feels like she's painted as this type of person where no matter how successful and intelligent she might be and how self-sufficient and independent, as soon as the man who's a deadbeat who refuses to do anything says, okay, maybe I'll give things a chance, she will drop everything and be with him. And up to this point, before Stella left Ted at the altar, I was siding with Stella most of the time. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but with all of their arguments, I was basically in Stella's corner. Up until her leaving him at the altar, I think that Stella was pretty good. But then everything does kind of change because she does in fact leave him at the altar.
I need a ride to New Jersey.
Okay. You'll pay for tolls, right? I'm kidding.
The story with Stella could have ended there, but it doesn't. And we have Stella going from bad to worse. So the next time Ted runs into Stella, he goes out to a restaurant and Stella comes in to get some takeout. He hides under the table, and then at the very end, he decides that he's going to confront her, and so he decides to follow her in a cab with the rest of his friends. And this is where he finds out that Stella moved to Manhattan to be with Tony. And this enrages him to no end because she was making him move out to New Jersey, but when it comes to Tony, she's all ready to move to Manhattan to be with him, and he's just livid. And so he pictures himself getting really angry and giving her a whole speech about how she made a mistake and she chose the wrong guy.
You made a really, really, really bad choice.
And I have to say, I kind of agree with him based on the recollection that Ted gives us. If, in fact, Stella waited years for a man who wouldn't live up to his standards and who wouldn't be a good father and who wouldn't be with her, and he only decided to be with her after she was ready to get married and he only came after her when she was already at her wedding, that makes Tony a pretty bad guy. And the fact that she's willing to move to Manhattan for him seems to suggest that it was his decision, and Stella is willing to, again, drop everything to be with him. So even though she has very good reasons to stay in New Jersey for her daughter, for the house, for the fact that she's very involved in her community, she's willing to drop all of that because Tony's in Manhattan, and so she'll go wherever Tony wants to go. But Ted sees that they're a very happy little family, and so he softens and he accepts it, which is kind of big of him. I mean, she did leave him at the altar. He was crushed, but seeing them all together as a family does make him realize that maybe they are right for each other. But it's not over. So next time Ted runs into Stella and Tony, he's very nice to them and he's very mature, and the gang applauds him for how mature he is, and it's great. So it shows that Ted can be mature and that he's accepted it, and that he understands why Stella wants to be with Tony. And then Tony comes to Ted and he's like, look, you were crushed, you seemed so upset, I feel very guilty. And Tony says, I have a shit ton of money, my family's very loaded, which would maybe perhaps explain why Stella is so willing, because how does Tony live in Manhattan in an apartment when he's only a karate instructor? Tony tries really hard to give Ted a job. He offers him a bunch of projects, including building a murder house, and Tony has just a poor judge of character. And then ultimately, Tony offers Ted a job at Columbia as a professor. And Ted is like, look, man, I don't want anything. I'm not crushed. Stella is an awful human being. She left me at the altar. I don't want her.
I'm better off without her. She's all yours, buddy.
And because of this, Tony breaks up with Stella. And again, it goes to show what kind of a man Tony is. So Tony is willing to break up with Stella so easily after talking to Ted. Just because Ted says that Stella is awful and she left him at the altar and he doesn't want to be with her because she's bad. So naturally, we could see where Ted is coming from by saying that. And Tony, based on that, is willing to dump the mother of his child, the woman who he was so desperate to get back at the wedding. He's like, oh no, I'm going to back off. And then we see that Stella is even more spineless and also kind of bad because she goes to Ted and she begs Ted to get Tony back for her. So here we see the fact that not only did she leave him at the altar, but she's also asking him to bring her ex back. None of this makes sense, right? I mean, Ted is totally vindicated. The fact that he tells Stella off, he's absolutely in the right. And it's a great moment for Ted because he's right in this moment that she has no right to ask him this and she's being ridiculous. But also, what the hell is going on with Stella? Even as a character, it just makes no sense. So this is a man that you've sacrificed everything for. You waited for years and you drop everything the second that he says he's ready. But then he dumps you over practically nothing and you're still standing there begging your ex to get Tony back? Well, what is this? So Stella agrees to pick up Barney from jail, and then Ted agrees to talk to Tony. And then we have this moment in the car where Stella and Ted talk about love. And Ted says that he's tired, that he's waiting for her, and that he doesn't understand why he cannot have these same things. And he says that he wants what Lily and Marshall have, and he wants what Stella and Tony have, which again is kind of ridiculous because it's like, man, what do you mean you want what Stella and Tony have? They don't really have much because Tony's willing to dump Stella over practically anything. I don't know if Stella and Tony should be the standard that Ted should be looking up to. But regardless, so they part ways very amicably. And then we get The Wedding Bride in season 5. So The Wedding Bride comes out and it's based on the relationship between Ted and Stella and Tony, and everything paints Ted in a terrible light. So he's being played by Chris Kattan and he's played as a complete joke, as a douchebag who treats Stella terribly. And there are some things that are accurate to Ted based on how he describes it. There are the red boots, the way that he pronounces encyclopedia, just all these little details that do align with who Ted is. But also, there are a lot of details that are completely inaccurate. So for example, that romantic 2-minute date is transformed into a situation where Jed Mosley is just saying, I only have time to have sex with you for 2 minutes, which is in direct contradiction to how things originally played out, according to Ted.
Here's the plan. Take a horse-drawn carriage through the park, and it just so happens the Philharmonic is playing an open-air...
Ted, 5 years.
Straight to the hotel?
Straight to the hotel.
Based on his recollection of events, Stella is the one who just wanted to rush right to it when they already made that decision. But in The Wedding Bride, everything is demonstrated to be as Ted's fault. So when he proposes, it's very nonchalant. He just gives her a teddy bear to just get Stella off his back, even though originally Ted was just so desperate to get Stella back and he proposed because it was spontaneous and he wanted to prove to her that he really wants to be with her. So The Wedding Bride is awful, and it kind of does show that Stella may be not a great person because she decided to make a film about their relationship, but also putting Ted in the worst possible light. However, when it comes to this, of course, it's important to consider perspective. And I think that this is something that comes up with the show in general. And when it comes to perspective, it's tough discussing this show because, of course, Ted is presented as an unreliable narrator. But then the question is, how much should we credit him with and how much should we discredit him with? And when it comes to even analyzing the show, it becomes very challenging because for all we know and for how the writers present it, we could just say, pretty much he made up 90% of it, right? So like everything that he says could be completely exaggerated. Everything that presents could be a lie. So when it comes to this defense of, perspective, it's really hard to discuss the show, but it's also kind of fun because that's what memory is. And that's what it is when it comes down to talking about people in general. When we hear a story, we're only getting one side of the story. And in this case, we are only getting one side of the story. So when it comes to The Wedding Bride, there are different ways to look at it. One way to look at it is the fact that what Ted told us about Stella might not be accurate, and that perhaps Ted was a lot more of a villain than he portrayed himself to be. That even as he presented things very romantically, even as he's presented things maybe from his end that he wasn't perfect in that relationship, that maybe he has seen himself more as a hero, more of a good guy than he really was, and that perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. So the wedding bride and Ted's recollection are two sides of the story, and we can't actually say for sure who is right and who is wrong, or maybe the answer, the truth, is somewhere in the middle. And when it comes to these stories, it's hard for us to know what the truth actually is.
It's exactly how it happened. He got every part right, even that thing with the nunchucks.
And so there are different ways to look at this possible film. Obviously, this is a sitcom. It's all done for entertainment. This was done for comedy. None of this is really relevant. But when it comes to looking at these characters and looking at, how it translates to people's perceptions, we are getting two different sides of the story. So that's what makes it so interesting. And then the final saga is that The Wedding Bride 2 comes out in season 9. And when it comes to Stella, we see that their relationship ends, and it ends in a lot of heartbreak, but ultimately they end up being on good terms, which is a good sign and shows maturity that in their last moment in the car, Ted is no longer upset with Stella. He's very understanding and he's hopeful for her and Tony. And then later on, when he calls her looking for the locket, Stella seems to be very calm about it. And personally for me, when it comes to Stella, I liked the character in the beginning and I thought it was a fun little introduction. So we do see that he goes into a new relationship. It's his way of getting over Robin, so it's a next stage. But a lot of it felt kind of rushed. And we also get to see the issues that he has in relationships, that he's not ready, and that he does this thing where he's very intense and he's very aggressive and he tries really hard to get a relationship. And that really demonstrated for her that, oh, this guy really wants to be with me. But then as soon as commitment came into the picture, he started to backtrack. So we get this element of Ted when it comes to Stella, of the fact that he's over the top and that he has this idea of love and this commitment and this marriage. But then when it comes down to it, he's just not ready. And so there's this pattern of behavior with him where he has these grandiose gestures and then he backpedals. And that's a perfect example with Stella. And when it comes to their relationship, I would say that if we take Ted's words as true, if we accept his recollection of events, then I would say that Stella is pretty good and a pretty great before we get to the wedding. So once they get to the wedding, and basically when she decides to leave Ted for Tony is when I really stop liking the character, because she just becomes ridiculous. And her whole thing with Tony is just, I don't know. It paints her in a light of this type of person, of this type of individual who would just drop at everything for their ex. So even at the end where Tony breaks up with Stella, she's still so desperate to get him back. And it's just interesting. It paints a very interesting dynamic. And I think that Stella was pretty great until that point. And then afterwards, they just keep ruining her character. And then at the very end with The Wedding Bride, it just, she's not that great.
I love that you guys live in a dorm. So American. It's like, let's all eat bologna sandwiches and be racist.
Then we get Karen, who is my favorite of Ted's girlfriends. I mean, don't get me wrong, she is absolutely awful, but I also love her and I think she's the best, and I'm so glad that we got her, and I wish we had more of her. And also, I think that first, she should belong in the beginning because technically she was his high school girlfriend. And second of all, I know she's not really supposed to be on this list because they only date for a few episodes, but at the same time, they did have a long relationship, we just don't see most of it. So to start from the beginning, Karen is Ted's on-again, off-again girlfriend from high school through college, and they date in high school, and then when they go off to college, they try to do long distance. And we find out that Ted cheated on Karen during orientation week. So he hooks up with a girl who he thinks is Lily, but it's actually Alyssa Lesky. Then he calls Karen crying, apologizing, quoting Descartes. So he is remorseful and apologetic, but also it's the first sign that Ted does cheat. And then in season 4, we find out more about Karen, how she's just a massive cheater.
I want to tell you something.
Really? Because I think I want to tell you the same thing.
Is your thing I had sex with my philosophy professor last night?
So she's super pretentious and she would cheat on Ted with other guys. She would actually bring back the guys to his dorm room, cheat on him, and then when Ted would catch her, she would deflect. And what's interesting is that Ted always takes her back. And it doesn't matter how awful Karen is. And Karen is depicted as absolutely awful. So on the Paris trip, Karen starts hooking up with the waiter while she's hanging out with the group. So she's blatantly cheating on him. She has no regard for him. She cheats on him multiple times, and every single time, Ted takes her back because she's his first, she's just an important part of his life, and we find out that Karen moves to New York. Ted meets up with her again, he starts seeing her again, and he doesn't tell the group. And in the present day, Karen is as pretentious and as awful as always.
I don't want to cause a scene, but your wine list has a Chateauneuf de Pop listed under your Côte de Provence. You might want to alert your sommelier.
And personally, I love that aspect. I love how pretentious she is because it's hysterical. They're just so douchey together, and it's great. And I love it. I mean, she's awful. She's awful in the past, how pretentious she is. She's awful in the future. But what's fun to see is that even with this terrible character, I can kind of see why Ted was dating her in the first place, because he also becomes pretentious. I mean, it's to an exaggerated level, and he's never as bad as Karen is. But we could also see them together. They have some things in common. They both correct people. They both cheat. They're both very pretentious.
All right, first of all, my parents live in Ohio. I live in the moment.
And even though Karen is absolutely awful, they have this common ground. And when he's around her, there's this side of him that comes out that doesn't come out with other characters or with other romantic relationships. And it almost feels like it kind of works for him specifically, where I think he enjoys being that part of him.
You're the fan of 2002 Chiantis.
Ew, no, you're the fan of 2002 Chiantis.
And so at the very least, I could see him enjoying that dynamic, even though every single time Karen breaks his heart. So going back to the present day, quote unquote, Ted starts dating Karen, and then he finds out that Karen was actually cheating with him on her boyfriend. So she has not changed her behavior. She's just as awful as she was back in college, except now Ted is not the one who's being cheated on. So he gives her an earful and he tells her that she's awful and that she doesn't have the guts to break up with someone. He walks away, but then he calls her again. She says that she understands, she's never going to do it again, she feels awful, and then get back together, they start dating, and the group is very upset with him because, again, Karen is awful. Fortunately, they do end up breaking up because Lily puts Robin's earring in Ted's bed, which leads Karen to think that he's cheating on her. And what's funny is that in his defense, Ted says that he has always been faithful to her.
Why should I believe you?
Maybe because I've always been faithful to you.
Huge mistake last night.
But there is something worth highlighting about this relationship, even though it's very brief and most of it happens off screen before we meet Ted. Personally, I think it's worthwhile to consider the fact that Ted kept going back to Karen. No matter how bad she was, he still acted like she was amazing. He could not let her go. So even though she was awful to him, he kept coming back. And even in the present day, after he grew up as an adult, he still went back to Karen, knowing how bad she treated him in the past. And then in the present day, after finding out that she has not grown, she hasn't changed, even though she claims that she's older and wiser and better, she's still a cheater, and he sees this in the modern day. And despite that, he still takes her back, which I think says something about Ted, that if he's quote unquote in love, it doesn't matter who the person is, how terrible they are, because with Karen, she was awful, and that still couldn't stop him. Literally, it had to be to such an extreme degree that Lily had to create a cheating scenario to start a fight. And what ultimately broke them up is the fact that Karen said that Ted can no longer be friends with Lily. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't this cheating scenario. It wasn't the fact that she cheated on him millions of times. It was the fact that Karen said you can no longer be friends with Lily, which by extension means that Ted can no longer be friends with Marshall. And I think this is kind of fun because this brings back that question of if your significant other asks you to stop being friends with someone, is it justified? Is it fair? Is it an unfair ultimatum? And we have these two different dynamics here. So here we have another example where Karen says you can no longer be friends with this person, and it's a contrast to when Victoria said you can no longer be friends with Robin. But in this particular case, it's easier for us to side with Ted and say, well, no, dump Karen, your friends are more important. In this case, it feels less justified. Ted's relationship with Lily and Marshall is so much stronger and longer, and they are a lot more loyal to him than Karen ever was. So it's an easier solution where he would rather dump Karen than lose Lily and Marshall. But I absolutely love Karen as an addition. Every time she's pretentious and douchey, it's fantastic. And I think it shows an interesting side of Ted that he just doesn't care almost, that when he's in love, when he's pursuing someone, when he wants to be with someone, it's just this constant push and pull dynamic where no matter how much they abuse him, mistreat him, push him away, he'll just keep bouncing back and jumping right back into the relationship, no matter how unhealthy it is, and he will claim that it's okay, and he has to be physically dragged out of it.
You say you want a family, you say you want to meet the one, but you are always chasing the wrong women.
To sum up these relationships, I think that they all played a valuable role in Ted's story. So when we get Victoria, she's obviously a necessary hurdle for Ted and Robin, and it's kind of unfortunate. She's kind of like Karen from The Office. So it's this new love interest that's introduced that's designed to put a wedge between the will they, won't they couple. And I do like how Victoria was introduced into the show, and I think that she was great in the first season. And then Stella is really his next stage, where he seems to be over Robin. And what I found interesting is that when we look at Ted's relationship with Stella, it seems like Robin is basically out of the picture. Of course, she's still around as a friend, but there's no discussion about Robin. The only potential issue is when Ted invites Robin to the wedding, but it really seems like he's inviting her as a friend, and then he feels really uncomfortable telling her no because he asked her to get on a plane to come visit. And the only issues that they really have is with the fact that they don't know each other that well, that they have disagreements with respect to where they live. So I feel like Stella was a necessary step, and of course Stella leads to Tony, which leads to Columbia, which leads to Cindy, which leads to Tracy. So she is a cog in the machine of Ted's love life. And then of course we have Karen, who I just love and is amazing. And I think that she demonstrates the fact that Ted sometimes just has this need to be in a relationship, or he just kind of falls into these situations, and even though he thinks he's in love, or even though he thinks that this person is great, it doesn't mean that she's right for him. And I think that's a valuable lesson overall, that even if you knew a person in high school or in college, and even if you guys were together at the very formative period in your life, doesn't mean that they're right for you. Sometimes people fall back on comfort. And for him, Karen was comfort. But just because he's comfortable with her and just because he knows her doesn't mean it's right. Ted meets Zoey when he's looking at the Arcadian. He finds out that she wants to save the Arcadian, but he ends up flirting with her and he develops a crush on her. So in traditional Ted fashion, he decides to help her out. He lies to her. And then when he finds out that she's married, he realizes that he doesn't really care about the building and he just cares about the girl. From this point on, we see that Zoey becomes an antagonist and she actively fights to preserve the Arcadian. She pickets outside the GNB building, and Zoey and Ted have this anger towards each other and they fight each other, and then eventually they become friends and they like each other. And then slowly but surely, Ted starts to develop feelings for Zoey and they start dating. And while they're dating, we see that they don't see eye to eye on anything. So basically they fight all the time. So ultimately they end up breaking up over the Arcadian because Ted decides not to preserve the building, and so this relationship ends. Overall, this relationship was unhealthy from the very beginning. So at first, they were enemies and she was cruel to him. She was throwing eggs at his window and he wasn't so nice to her either. And then when they slowly became friends, it was kind of fun that they were civil, and I feel like Zoey as a character could have been a fun addition if she never became a relationship. So if she remained an antagonist or if she slowly became a friend, I think that would have been kind of cool if it was an enemies to friends kind of a dynamic with her and the rest of the group. But because they turned her into a lover and because they had such a difficult relationship, I feel like this character just comes off as very unlikable. And ultimately, I feel like out of all the relationships Ted has had, the long-term ones, she's the most irrelevant to the main story or to the main arc. And that's not to say that she doesn't reveal some aspects of Ted's character. So we do see that Ted falls very easily for a pretty girl. And it's actually mentioned in the episode where she's discussed. The fact that Ted is willing to change his personality for a girl, regardless of what it is. And here we see the same thing. So I kind of feel like Zoey was put in to sort of extend the storyline, because I feel like out of all the relationships, she doesn't fully fit into the main arc. But at the same time, I do think that there's some significance to this particular character in how we see Ted as a character. Personally, I think that the biggest impact that Zoey had is actually her husband, the captain, who continues on throughout the series and who becomes more significant when he gives Lily a job, and who's just such a fun character. But as a whole, I feel like Zoey is very self-contained and is kind of less relevant as compared to the other relationships.
Here's her key back.
I never gave you a key.
And here's her grandmother's ring.
She was buried wearing this.
Then in season 8, we get Jeannette, who is the worst of Ted's relationships. And that's because she's the most dangerous. Out of everybody, I think that Ted is at greatest risk when he's with Jeannette, and she's completely unhinged. And Ted meets Jeannette when he's on the subway and he sees that she's reading the same book, which would have been a meet cute, but then we find out that she's a stalker. And I like the way that the episode does it. Slowly but surely we find out how unhinged Jeannette is. And as we peel back the layers, Ted is still charmed by her based on the Dobler-Dahmer theory that because he likes her, everything that she's doing is charming, even though it's kind of scary. So basically, we find out that she found where he works, she went to his university, and when she couldn't find him, she started a fire, which then led everybody to evacuate because she wanted to meet him. And then later we find out that she has been stalking him since he was in the New Yorker, and then she followed him to a bookstore, bought the same book, and that's why she saw him on the subway. And like I said, despite all of this, Ted is like, this is great. I like her. She's so obsessed with me. It's amazing. And then when they start dating, we see that Jeannette is very dangerous and unstable. So she does things like throw beer bottles at his TV when she's upset. And it reaches a point where Ted decides to break up with her, quote unquote. So he breaks up with her in public. Then he asks his friend not to let her into the apartment, which they do anyway. And then we find out that he didn't technically break up with her because after he tried to break up with her, they ended up having sex. And then when she's barricaded in his room, destroying stuff, and he comes in trying to kick her out, they have sex again. And when they try to call the police to get her out, they find out that she's a cop that's previously been suspended.
Okay, but remember.
I know, no excessive force. Last thing I need is another suspension, am I right?
So not only is this woman incredibly unstable and dangerous, but she's a cop that's previously been suspended. So it just goes to a level of completely unsafe. But that doesn't stop Ted. So despite all of this, every time he comes into the room and she's saying just the worst things.
I'm gonna send Lily a dead animal in the mail.
She's just someone who Ted should not be dating, but as she's saying these things, he's looking at her like she's the best person in the world.
What is your ring size?
And it goes to show that Ted has terrible judgment. And by episode 18, so they met in episode 15, by 18, they're still dating. And he invites her to Barney and Robin's wedding. And then she ends up breaking up with him.
You're just so intense, and it's all moving way too fast.
But that doesn't stop Ted, because then he tries to go to her place to win her back, and Barney stops him. And then when Barney tries to get Ted out and to do a bunch of plays, Ted still gets Jeannette back. So this is also something that we've seen with Zoey, where when Ted is under a lot of stress, when something is going wrong, he tries to dive back into a relationship. He tries to call people from his past because he just can't cope. And so even though this individual is someone who's not safe to be around, Ted still tries to win her back. And the second time around, after he gets her back, that's when she burns down his apartment. And finally, Ted gets into his head that perhaps it's time for him to settle down. And perhaps it's time for him to grow up and not chase these types of people. And this is why I think Jeannette is significant, because like Ted said, that is the last woman that he dated before he met the mother. And she was the element that allowed him to see into his behavior and his patterns, that he kind of goes after these types of individuals and it's not healthy for him. And even though he knows that he's going in the wrong direction, he still does it. And he has these patterns of behavior, such as trying to change himself for a person and adopting all these different hobbies, or such as going back to a previous relationship just because he's struggling with something in the present day and he tries to lean into that comfort. But it's with Jeannette that he finally realized that perhaps it's time for him to really be serious, to stop chasing the wrong women, like Robin says, and to really focus on understanding someone and actually truly developing a relationship.
What are you doing?
Remembering this.
Tracy is the perfect woman. So with Tracy, we get the one, and she's the dream girl for Ted, and that's how she's presented. And the way that she's introduced into the show, I think that it's so easy to fall in love with this character because she's just so perfect for Ted. And I think the show did a good job of making her so likable and making it easy for the audience to see why he fell for her and why she's the one. And that's not to say that there aren't any complaints when it comes to this character. And because Tracy's so perfect, I'm going to focus on mostly the critiques of this character, because otherwise it's just praising how great Tracy is. And I think there are quite a few critiques that are worth addressing. And even though this character is so pivotal to the show, I mean, the show is called How I Met Your Mother and she is the mother, we don't actually get to meet her until season 9. And before that, we get some hints as to who she is, but very, very few. We could tell that basically the show wasn't focused on her as much. So we got a few hints, but nothing about her personality, nothing about her character. She's very vague. And that's mostly due to the fact that I think the writers didn't know this character either. That for most of the seasons, they weren't trying to develop her. They weren't trying to give her a backstory. They weren't trying to discover more about who she is because she's irrelevant. So Tracy's introduced in 3 different ways. One way is in the present, so in the early 2000s when she meets the gang. Then we have all the flashbacks of her past, so we get a little bit of a background on Tracy, and we get flash forwards showing Ted and Tracy's relationship when it goes forward. So let's start with the present. Tracy first meets Lily. So Lily and Tracy are on the train, and Lily's very frustrated because she wants to look at a picture of baby Marvin that Marshall's mom posted. So Tracy hears that Lily is muttering, and she offers her some cookies. They end up sitting next to each other. They end up chatting and bonding, and we see that they are friends pretty much automatically. They're very comfortable with each other. Tracy tries to help Lily by preventing her from looking at photos, so she's already there of support. They get into a physical altercation. At the end, they hug it out. It's very cute.
Do you want a hug?
Then Tracy meets Barney, and this is kind of a flashback to 8 months prior. Barney goes to a store to try to pick up a girl, and he runs into Tracy, and instead of being disgusted or falling for his moves, she does something unexpected.
It's gonna be okay. You're a good guy. You will get through this.
And then she walks away. Subsequently, Barney goes after Tracy to ask her what the hell she's talking about, and they end up sitting down talking about their relationships. Barney shares about his relationship with Robin, and Tracy shares that she has a boyfriend, but that she doesn't feel that connected. She's not that serious. So basically, Tracy helps Barney out. So Barney walks away from this interaction very headstrong about what he wants. Then Tracy meets Marshall and Marvin. Marshall and Marvin are walking towards the venue because their bus broke down, and Tracy swoops in like a hero with her car. She picks them up. They end up chatting along the way, and Tracy shares her struggles with her bandmate who basically took over the team, or the band rather, and Marshall talks about his struggles with Lily. And this is one of the interactions I feel feels most realistic. The way that Marshall and Tracy interact really feels like they're friends in a way that feels calm and also, I guess, approachable. They both seem to get along really well. And then Tracy meets Robin. When Robin is trying to run away from her wedding, Tracy stops her physically, unintentionally, so Robin bumps into her, and at this point Robin is frazzled and she thinks that Tracy may give her advice, but instead Tracy says, I don't really know you, I don't know how I can help, but I can say that maybe taking a breath, taking 3 deep breaths might help you. And that gives enough time for Barney to come out and for Robin and Barney to resolve their issues. And then, of course, finally, Tracy meets Ted at the train station. Looking at how Tracy meets the rest of the gang, I could see how some fans have issues with Tracy's character because it's too perfect and it's too coincidental. So the writers did have a challenge of introducing a new character, but also trying to make her likable at the same time. So because of that, they made Tracy, I think, too perfect in the sense that Tracy's a guardian angel for all of them. She comes in and saves them every single time in a perfect way. With Lily, Lily's struggling on her own, and Tracy comes in with cookies, and she comes in with guidance and support, and they're automatic friends. With Marshall and Marvin, she picks them up and she saves them in that sense, and it's, a big help. And with Barney, she's a massive, massive help. And with Barney, I think it's the most unrealistic in the fact that not only does she run into him, but also she sees right through him, even though she knows nothing about him. And this is a girl who's supposed to be, much younger than the gang, and for some reason she has all this wisdom, and for some reason she gives him the exact right advice that he needs. And with Robin, she bumps into her unintentionally, but she also keeps Robin from running away from the wedding. And of course, she really saves Ted. So with all of these scenarios, not only does she meet the gang at separate times, but she also helps them out a lot. So she's an angel to all of them. She saves all of them. And that's what makes her so likable initially, because everyone loves her right away and everyone feels like they're being helped and supported. And we even see that after Tracy meets Marshall and Marvin, she's at the bar knitting a little hat for Marvin. So she's very motherly already, but also friendly and incredibly warm to such a high degree that, she's offering her cookies. She's knitting for a child that she barely even knows. And, again, she's just a person in the band. She doesn't know these people, but she likes them and they like her. We also get a look into Tracy's past, and it's a really nice backstory, and I love the fact that they devoted an entire video to Tracy's past. Basically, we start from the beginning. So during the pilot episode, it's Tracy's 21st birthday, and we find out that her boyfriend passes away that day. And from this point on, Tracy's incredibly sad. She feels like she can't move on. She felt like her boyfriend Max was her soulmate, and so it takes her years to move forward. And we see the day that she goes out on St. Patrick's Day and how she leaves her umbrella. And then we see that she wants to solve homelessness and she wants to solve poverty. And so she decides to take economics, which is why she ended up in Ted's class. And that's how she met Cindy. And we see that she tries to move on and she dates Lois. And even though they have a nice relationship and he's a great guy, she doesn't have that connection with him. We see that she makes her breakfast food sing and he doesn't really have that much of a reaction to it. It's comfortable and it's nice, but as she told Barney, he just doesn't seem to be the one. Then we get to the wedding and we see that Lois proposes. And when he proposes, Tracy is overwhelmed because deep down she still loves her boyfriend who passed away. And she goes outside and she asks him if she can move on. And I absolutely love this scene. I think Kristen Milioti is just so fantastic. If anyone ever decides to go back and rewatch the episode, I feel like she really captures it. Even though we don't know this character that well, the pain and this episode plays out really well with how much she struggled with his death and how she wasn't able to move on. And that scene where she feels like she has to ask permission because it's really for her, it's not about Max, right? It's about her allowing herself to move on. And then the wind blows through and that lets her know that yes, that she can move on, but even though she feels like she can move on, she tells Lois no, that she doesn't want to get married, but it's a sign that she's ready to move on. And then we get Ted and Tracy's relationship, which is reflected through flash forwards. So we get to see them meet at the end of the wedding, and then we get to see how their relationship progresses a little bit through different flash forwards. We see that Ted canceled his trip to Chicago because he met Tracy. So it is a very extreme move, but he did like her a lot. And we see that when he talks to her and he calls her the next day, Lily notices that this is different, that this may be real. And then we get to see their first date, which is very cute. And they basically end up going for a walk and Ted tells her his story about Blauman. And we see that they're just enjoying each other's company and she sees Lois on the street. And because of that, she thinks maybe she's not ready to date because she just broke off an engagement. So Ted decides to walk her back. And it's clear that they want to leave each other, that they're just having a good time. And they both feel like they don't want to end the date, even though Tracy says that she does. And then at the end of it, he decides to walk away.
8 years earlier, I probably would have given some embarrassing speech, confessed my love, and scared her off. But I didn't.
He's grown up at this point, and he knows not to do that. He knows to just accept things as they are and to move forward and to walk away. So we see in those 8 years that at this point, and I think after Jeannette, Ted has had tremendous growth, that he's no longer falling for these grandiose romantic gestures, that it's calm and it's just present and it's simple. And I think that that's what makes the Tracy and Ted dynamic so beautiful, and to watch that beginning, because a lot of the aspects of Ted, which I think were just so over the top, seem to be so much milder and basically gone. In this particular situation with Ted and Tracy, we see their initial chemistry and spark, and it's very simple. They just enjoy talking to each other. And we see right away that they seem to be very aligned. And then on their first date, we see that they just want to keep talking to each other. So going back to the film that I mentioned at the beginning when talking about Victoria, Before Sunrise, and I think it's just one of the most romantic films because it's so simple. And when it comes to stories, I don't think it's necessary to have over-the-top gestures or over-the-top magic and romance to demonstrate how two people fall in love. And I feel like a movie like Before Sunrise demonstrates this, that all the movie does is have these two people do very mundane things and walk around Vienna. Nothing really happens, absolutely nothing. They just talk. They just walk around and they talk. There's really no plot besides the fact that they're just walking around and talking. But through this, we get to see how much they're just enjoying each other's company and how much they're getting to know each other. It's through sharing information and sharing personal things and just understanding each other and being around each other, enjoying each other's company, that you could see how two people develop a spark. And same thing with Tracy and Ted, how they go on this date and nothing really happens. They just end up going for a walk, and it's very simple. And they don't have these crazy stories. They don't have crazy similarities that they discuss in that moment. We find out they do have a lot of similarities, but we don't really see it on this date. They just want to be around each other. And at the end, we see that they want to leave each other. And the whole thing is just so simple, but it works. And even though Ted really likes her, he's willing to walk away, and he's willing to not profess his love and beg for her to stay around. And because she feels the same way, she asks him to come back, and they end up dating. Tracy, at the end, after he finishes his story, she kisses him, and then she asks him if he wants to keep walking, because she just wants to hang out with him longer. And I feel like that's such a beautiful indicator of the fact that they're just really enjoying each other's company. And then we basically get a speed run of their relationship. So we see that they celebrate their anniversary at the Farhampton Inn. And I love the way that they set up that scene as well, where first we see Ted in the present day just by himself doing a crossword puzzle. And even though he's not sad per se, we can tell that he's at this point where, he's all alone. He's going to Robin's wedding, which is stressful. The concierge individual keeps rubbing in the fact that he's single, and so he's sitting there by himself, and at the same time, a year in advance, we see that he's there with Tracy, and he's so incredibly happy with her. And so that juxtaposition of him all alone and him and Tracy together and his extreme happiness, I think is just done so well. And then we see that when they go up to the lighthouse, Ted proposes, and I think it's just one of the most romantic proposals on the show. Then we see in 2015, Ted is planning their wedding, and then they can't get married because Tracy's pregnant, so she wants to wait. Then we get to see Tracy's second pregnancy and how supportive they are of each other and how loving they are with each other. We find out that Tracy wrote a book about poverty, which was published, and they're celebrating. And we get to see them with their kids and how loving of a family they have. And we also see how well Tracy is integrated into the group. So she goes to Robots versus Wrestlers with them, so she becomes part of their tradition. And the group treats her as one of their own, of course. She's very well integrated at this point, even though we don't actually get to see all that detail. We also get to see the gang visit them at their home, and we get to see Ted re-propose to Tracy because it's been years, and there's just so much simplicity to it. And we also get to see their wedding. And I think that that's also part of this narrative, and to me, it seems like that Ted has come to adopt a simpler life and a simpler way to express love, that it doesn't have to be grandiose. It doesn't have to be overly romantic. And it's still incredibly romantic, but because it's so intimate and personal. His second proposal is very simple. It's just Tracy at home folding laundry, and he comes up to her and he proposes to her saying, let's just get married next Tuesday. And he doesn't need the bells and whistles anymore. He doesn't need anything over the top or magical. He just wants to get married, and he's willing to have a simple proposal. And then when we see their wedding, it's beautiful, but it's just very simple. We don't get much of it, but all of that is gone because when the love is real, you don't need any of that stuff. Then in 2024, we see Ted and Tracy go to the Farhampton Inn again, and they're sharing a bunch of their stories with each other. And they've become an old married couple at this point, that they know each other's stories. And we see that they're both very sad, and it's a very bittersweet relationship at this point. We don't know why, but we see that they're happy that they know each other's stories and that they've covered so much ground. They know each other so well at this point, but there's a great deal of sadness. And then we get to watch her die. As everybody knows, she gets some unknown terminal illness, which leads her to pass away. And that explains why Ted and Tracy are just so sad in 2024 when they're at the Farhampton Inn, because they're just trying to squeeze in as much time together as they can.
In a moment like that, when what's really happening is too intense to deal with, sometimes it's best
to leave it unspoken and just enjoy each other's company instead.
But I don't want to focus on her demise right now. I think I'll talk about it when I talk about the ending, which maybe I'll do a separate video on. First, I want to focus on the criticism. And one criticism is the fact that Tracy is too much like Ted. That the way that she's presented is just too identical and too specific. So for example, throughout the 9th season, we see all the ways that she's similar to Ted, and it's just very, very tailored to Ted. We find out that she also used to be a bit of a detective when she was a kid.
And as a kid, I was a bit of a detective.
We find out that she has her own calligraphy set, she has her own driving gloves, which is very specific, a coin collection, a chainmail corset from the Renaissance Fair.
Okay, he would have run screaming once he saw my calligraphy set, my coin collection, my chainmail corset from the Renaissance Fair.
When the gang comes over, we know that she has her jousting lance from the Renaissance Fair, and that's hers. That's not Ted's, and we would expect it to be Ted's. And she also likes to make stops at bizarre roadside attractions, just like Ted. So all of these things are just very specific and very similar to Ted. She's kind of quirky like Ted. And I understand why the show was doing this. It was trying to show the fact that Ted and Tracy have a lot of things in common, so they would enjoy a lot of things together. For some of it, I could see making sense. For others, it's too specific. So naturally, because this is Ted talking about his dead wife, of course, he's going to share only the best things. He's only going to talk about all the ways that they were similar. He's only going to focus on all the ways that she was perfect and fantastic because he loved her and now she's gone. And he's talking to his kids. So he's talking about the mother of his children to his children. Naturally, he's only going to have praise because he had a good relationship. And he may also be looking at things, of course, through a different lens now that when somebody's gone, you kind of remember all the good times if things ended well, and all the bad things just become so irrelevant. So given the context, it makes sense why Tracy is presented so perfectly. It doesn't fully explain why she has so many things in common with Ted. So for some of the things, it just seems still so specific. There are some things like the Renaissance Fair, maybe being a kid detective, that's like, oh, sure, these are kind of odd and quirky. I mean, I think everyone loves the Renaissance. I don't know. My friends and I love the Renaissance Fair, so I don't think that's odd. But the other things like liking calligraphy and having a coin collection and having driving gloves, which I think is just so uncommon, I feel like for those things to have that all in one person perhaps is a little too perfect, and the writers just went a little too far. Same with how they had Tracy meet the rest of the gang. I feel like it worked, and I think it was in some ways necessary for the show to really introduce her quickly, but at the same time it just felt like too much of a coincidence. So her being a guardian angel for the rest of the gang and her having all these quirky things in common with Ted was just too lined up. And there's also the issue of the fact that we don't really see enough of her struggles. So one of the main complaints is the fact that she's kind of a manic pixie dream girl, or some people feel that she fits the manic pixie dream girl trope. And for those who are unfamiliar, it's a trope assigned to a female character that's a love interest to the protagonist, and she's presented as kind of a quirky character, and she's kind of a guide, a spirit guide for the main character. So the male main character falls in love with this quirky, beautiful girl who kind of leads him onto the right path, and she tends to be one-dimensional, and she ends up either providing a life lesson to the protagonist, or she provides emotional support without receiving anything in return. So that's the manic pixie dream girl. And a lot of people feel that Tracy is designed to be a manic pixie dream girl. I have a different perspective. So I feel like Tracy is more multidimensional than a manic pixie dream girl. And I feel like we do get some of her struggle and we do get some development from her. So we don't get too many flaws, and the flaws that she has are so minor, right? We see that she's kind of a pushover. We see that she doesn't really stand up for herself. We see that this makes sense, but she has a lot of trouble moving on. So she's unsure of herself. She's not like this all-around perfect woman. She's perfect for Ted, but she's not presented as a woman of all trades, everyone that knows everything. Although a little bit almost feels that way because she's also a painter and she has a beautiful voice and she's just so incredibly kind and she knows how to knit and she bakes cookies. So these elements do kind of make her perfect. So I think that the writers went maybe a little too far, but at the same time, we get to see her struggle. And the episode that we get that's focused on her, I think was really nice because we get that backstory and we see that she goes through her own pain and we see that she has her own journey of moving on, that we only get a tiny snippet of it, but that snippet is enough to really understand the fact that she has also been struggling over the years and she's also went through a tragedy and she's also been trying to move on. And her finding Ted was also significant for her. She needed it as well. They saved each other. And in that scene where she says that she wants to move on and she asks Max for permission, I feel like it goes to show that there's so many layers to this character and we just don't get to see all of it, but we get to see enough to understand that this is a complex character. And, well, I guess it's a shame that they didn't really explore it more, but there are bits and pieces that demonstrate the fact that there is more to Tracy. So I think that there's enough there to say that Tracy is a bit more complex. I do feel like she was presented in a little bit of a too perfect light, but given the context, it makes sense. At the end, when Ted says that, he loves the journey that he was on and he has held on to memories of Tracy during every fight and every struggle. So it's not like their relationship was perfect. It's just that we never got to see it. And because she's gone now, of course, he's going to focus on all the good times. And she's not identical to Ted. So Tracy and Ted have a different personality. They do have the same interests, but we also see that Tracy does things like paint robots, which is not something that we've ever seen Ted do. So Tracy has her own quirks. Tracy has a quirk of making the breakfast food sing, which is, again, unique to Tracy. And we see that Tracy also has a very dry sense of humor, which I have not seen in the other characters, but a few times she comes up with these kind of very dry, sarcastic quips.
I like how trusting you are. There could be drugs or poison in there.
Is there?
No idea. I found them under my seat.
You just met me. I could be a serial killer.
I like to believe in people. Plus, what are the chances that we're both serial killers?
And she's not like this manic pixie dream girl that's presented as like a Mary Sue that's overly perfect. Although I absolutely understand the complaints. One criticism that comes up is the fact that Tracy is kind of disposable. The way that the last season is set up, it gives the impression that Ted just ended up with Tracy because he couldn't be with Robin. So it kind of is made to feel that Tracy is just the consolation prize in the way that she's just the mother. It's just a woman that he wanted to have children with, and Robin really is the goal because that's how the narrative is set up. The fact that we spend a whole season kind of not really focusing on Tracy, even though she's technically there. And at the end, we only get a few snippets before she's killed off, and then Ted ends up with Robin. And I could see where people are coming from given the structure of the show, that Tracy is really not important to the story. That's not about Tracy at all. It's not really about How I Met Your Mother, because it's not about the mother. It's all about Ted's journey and his growth and all the things that he had to do to get to that point, to be comfortable with himself, to love someone openly but not in a grandiose way, and to sort of appreciate another person in a simple way, and to find love and to open himself up to it. So it's really about an individual who grows from his late 20s into his 30s and who understands himself better and who understands love better. And when he's ready to step into a relationship, that's when he meets Tracy. But given the structure of the show, some fans are led to feel that Tracy was really reunited with her soulmate, who is Max, when she ends. So that the show ends with Ted and Tracy reuniting with their soulmates. Tracy reunited with Max in heaven and Ted reuniting with Robin in the present day. And I think that that's not what the show was trying to convey, in my opinion. I feel like the show was trying to suggest that Ted truly loved Tracy, that she wasn't just a woman to have children with, that he really, really loved her, and that she was the one for him and she was his soulmate. And likewise, Ted was Tracy's soulmate. And Tracy does tell Ted that he is the love of her life. And they do have a very deep and close connection in the few flash forwards that we get. And for me, there are a few scenes that indicate to me that Ted truly loved Tracy. The first is the conversation that Ted has with Klaus and the speech that Klaus gives about love, how love is this instantaneous thing, that there's this person who is the one, that it just courses through you, and it's very deep and it's passionate and it's emotional. And when Klaus asks Ted, have you ever felt that before?
Yeah, I think so.
And Klaus says, if you have to think about it, you haven't felt it, indicating the fact that Ted hasn't felt it yet. So all of his relationships, he has not gotten there. But when Klaus says you haven't really felt it, that's when we get a pan out to Farhampton. So suggesting the fact that this deep love, this soulmate love that Klaus is talking about, it refers to Ted and Tracy, that Tracy is the one, that Ted will experience this type of love with Tracy. And the other moment, which is very bittersweet, is the episode where Ted is sitting alone at the bar thinking about going to Robots vs. Wrestlers, and then he finds out that he's all alone, and he asks himself, what would I do with this time? If I could do anything with this moment, would I be going to Robots vs. Wrestlers? And he says that if he could do anything, he would run to Tracy's door and tell her that he's going to meet her and that he wishes that he met her sooner, that he wants those extra 45 days because he wants to spend as much time with her as possible.
I want this extra 45 days. With you, I want each one of them.
And I don't think that he'd be saying that for someone that he liked or someone that he just ended up with or settled with, that if he could do anything with his time, he would want to spend it with her. We also get a moment on their first date, and I think like it's a moment where Ted steps out of the memory a little bit, where Tracy asks him if he wants to keep walking, and he pauses and he looks at her. And she asks him what he's doing, and he says remembering. And it feels like Ted is stepping outside of the moment and trying to regain that experience and to regain that feeling. And to me, the way that the scene is set up, I think it's meant to convey this feeling of the fact that he remembers her very fondly, and it's not insignificant to him. All the scenes that we have of them together, it's very loving, and the way that it's played out, the way that the actors play out those scenes, I think it's meant to show how much they enjoy each other's company and how much they've spent time together and really enjoy all those elements together. And there's a deleted scene, which I know some people may not accept as canon, but there's a deleted scene in the final episode where Ted runs into Robin, they go out to lunch, and Robin misunderstands Ted, and she thinks that Ted wants to get together with her, and so she says, "Oh, I feel the same way, I think that we should be together."
I miss you. And I've been feeling crazy for thinking about it, but now that I know that you feel the same way too, I don't feel crazy anymore.
And Ted says, "Oh no, I'm very happy. I wouldn't leave Tracy for you." So he's very happy in his relationship and he's not settling for it. And it's not like a pressure because he feels like he should be with her, but because he's truly happy in his relationship with Tracy and he would not choose Robin over Tracy. So with these little scenes, it's not a ton, but I feel like what the show is trying to convey is the fact that Ted really fell in love with Tracy, that Tracy made him super happy, and that is the relationship that he was looking for years. So if given the option to do anything with his time, if he would want to spend his time with his wife, I feel like that's a sign of the fact that he truly loved her. Now, did the writers treat Tracy as disposable? Well, see, that could be debated. So I have no doubt that Ted truly loved Tracy and that she was significant to him and she was not disposable to him. But when it comes to the writers, I think that an argument could certainly be made that they were not as invested in this character and they did not care as much about this character or developing her. And did they treat her as solely as the mother and not as someone that they wanted to develop and create as a fully fledged character? So perhaps I'll address that in my conversation about the ending.
No more dating. I'm ready to settle down.
And kids, for the first time in my life, I really meant it.
So, putting it all together, starting with Zoey. So I previously said that I think Zoey is the least relevant, and that's not to say that she's useless to the plot or that she doesn't show anything about Ted, because I think that Zoey is a great demonstration of his continuation of his behavior. So first of all, she demonstrates the fact that he continues to choose unavailable women or women who are not right for him. And Zoey's both unavailable and she's not right for him for the fact that she was first married and for the fact that they can't agree on anything. And then second of all, she also demonstrates the fact that even though Ted says he's ready for a commitment, he's really not.
I can't wait for our first Valentine's Day as a couple. The one we'll remember for years.
Even though he claims that he's ready for a serious relationship, as soon as that's on the table, he starts to panic and he leaves the state. And third of all, Zoey demonstrates the fact that Ted is willing to change himself, pick up new hobbies, change his personality just to impress a girl and to get a girl. And then we have Jeannette. And even though Jeannette is meant to be a comedic character, I don't think we're supposed to take her seriously. I think that she's very significant for Ted and what she represents for Ted. And there's a conversation that Robin has with Mike Tyson, which I think illuminates a lot about Ted's character.
When a guy sends mixed signals to a girl, it takes a toll on the psychological well-being. And you want to know why a girl acts crazy? Look at the guy she's dating. Then you really see some crazy.
When it comes to Jeannette, I don't see her so much as an individual character as much as she is a manifestation of Ted's psyche. So she is completely unhinged and unstable, but so is Ted. Ted has lost his mind. Ted knows that she's been stalking him for a year, and he knows the fact that she started a fire in order to see him, but that did not stop his behavior, even though his friends told him. So all of his friends are trying to support him and help him out, but he's not listening. at this point, he's perpetuating this behavior. And it's just a demonstration of the fact that Ted is very much like Jeannette in this moment. He is not as violent as Jeannette, but he's not acting rationally, and he's provoking this behavior. When he's alone with her, he's telling her things like he's falling for her, and he's asking her what her ring size is. That is a dangerous, dangerous message to be sending to someone who is unstable. So he's perpetuating this cycle of behavior. And I think that Jeannette basically represents what Ted is doing himself. And it's also interesting, and I'll get to this when I talk about Robin, hopefully, eventually. But Ted also has some stalkerish and creepy behavior when it comes to Robin. He's never as violent, but he also displays some weird, unhinged behavior. And I really feel like Jeannette just kind of represents this side of him, that he's just completely out there. And I once saw a comment that was criticizing Lily for the fact that she told Ted, you know what, if you want to see Jeannette, you could keep seeing Jeannette, and we'll be here for you when it's over. And, the person was saying that that's a terrible message to send because he should not be with Jeannette. But at the same time, I think that what the show's trying to convey is the fact that they've been trying to help him. And he's trying to push himself to rock bottom, and he's not listening. So I think that the only solution is for them to let him make this mistake, because he's just going down this direction and he's just making things worse, and he should know better. So not only is he making things worse for himself, he's doing it for his friends, and he's also making Jeannette worse because he's sending her the wrong message. And the other thing that's significant about Jeannette is the fact that Ted finally stopped lying to himself. So from the beginning of the show, Ted said that he's ready to find the one and that he's looking for a relationship. But when we cut forward and we see that Ted says, I'm finally ready to settle down, what becomes apparent is the fact that Ted wasn't ready. He kept saying to himself that he was ready, and he was lying to himself, but he truly was enjoying the single life.
As a young, unattached man in New York City, I had a great time. A great time. What was I saying?
And that's what really represents Ted, that a part of him was really enjoying this.
I had such a great time that it took someone very special to make me want to settle down. And that someone was Jeannette.
And I feel like it's a great representation when it comes to Barney and Marshall. So Ted is both Barney and Marshall, but for most of the show, he's more like Barney than he is Marshall. That he's enjoying playing around, he's enjoying going out, meeting new people, he's enjoying going on different dates, but he wants to be Marshall and he's aspiring to be him, even though what he's closest to really is Barney. And ultimately, that's what Jeannette represents. The fact that he was not honest with himself. And in this episode, he's finally saying the truth. He's finally saying, I'm ready to settle down, and he finally means it. And he acknowledges the fact that he didn't fully mean it before. And what I think is interesting about this is that I think there are two ways to look at this particular character when it comes to when he's ready to actually be in a relationship. So usually Robin is brought up, the fact that when he finally let Robin go is the point that he was ready to find someone else. But I think that Jeannette is equally as significant, because it's with Jeannette that he finally says that he's ready to settle down and he finally means it. So I think that Robin wouldn't have been enough, and I'll get to this more eventually. But I think that it was also this element of acknowledging the fact that he doesn't want to play the field anymore. He wants to settle down. So we could look at it as the fact that it was, in fact, his fear of commitment that was holding him back. Or we could say that Robin was holding him back. Or we could also say that it was a combination of both. He needed both. He needed to be ready to commit, and he needed to let go of Robin. And those two things had to occur in order for him to actually find a real relationship. But in essence, what Jeannette represents is that Ted was full of shit, that he kept chasing these women, and Jeannette is an excellent example of that. And I think that finally, once that was over, he was able to see the fact that his behavior was unhealthy, and it was unhealthy towards other people, and it was unhealthy towards himself. And he was finally able to calm down a bit. And finally, we got Tracy. And I know I devoted quite some time to the critiques of Tracy's character, but on the whole, I like what they did with her character. I just wish we had more of her. And if season 9 was mostly about Tracy and just a little bit about Ted, I would have been okay with that. I think it would have been really fun to get to know this particular character. And I'm also just a big fan of Kristen Milioti. And if anyone else is a fan, I highly recommend the movie Palm Springs. It's on Hulu. It's just quickly became one of my favorite films. She's also in a Black Mirror episode, which I absolutely love. But anyway, back to Ted and Tracy. The one thing that gives me pause with respect to how the show presents Ted and Tracy is this notion of destiny and fate. So I think that ultimately Ted had to come to the realization that he was not honest with himself when he said he was looking for a relationship, and he wasn't fully honest with himself when he was pining for Robin. But I also feel like there's this element of when you're ready, the right person will come. And this ties back to the speech that Klaus gives.
And you're absolutely sure you'll find that someday?
Of course. Everyone does eventually. You just never know when or where.
So Klaus says that everyone will find the one, and I just feel like even though it's a very beautiful and aspirational message, I saw a post on Reddit where someone wrote a comment saying, oh, I can't wait for this, or I'm looking forward for the one. And I just feel like it's important to understand the fact that, this is supposed to be a sitcom, but also a romantic type of show. And I think it is a little aspirational. And I think that the critical message is that you have to work on yourself. You have to let go of things that no longer serve you. And you have to come to understand what it is that you're looking for and to be honest with yourself. And once you work on yourself and you let go of certain things, that's when you can actually be ready for a relationship, but you still have to go out and get it.
Aren't you tired of waiting for destiny, Ted? I mean, isn't it time to make your own destiny?
Like what Robin said to Ted, if you want destiny, go get it. You can't just sit there and think things are going to line up, because this is a kind of an aspirational show, and Ted meets Tracy at the right time and she's the perfect girl for him, and it happens exactly as Klaus promised, but that's not what reality is. So of course there's this added element of the fact that Ted is looking at his story in hindsight, and of course hindsight is 20/20, and for him everything does fit into a beautiful, simple narrative that once he was ready, he came upon the most perfect woman. And of course, she'd be perfect because that's who he ended up falling in love with. And of course, in his eyes, she will always be perfect, even though in reality, their relationship probably wasn't.
I carried that lesson with me through every stupid fight we ever had. I'm crazy about you. I think we should be together. What do you say?
In the pilot episode, Ted sees Robin across the room and he has this love at first sight moment. And we do see this later on throughout the show. So he has the same type of love at first sight moment with Victoria and with Stella. And I don't know, maybe this is just me, and because I've seen the show You, I start to feel like Ted is a little bit like Joe Goldberg with that tunnel vision love. So every time he's looking at them, it just makes me think, he's thinking,
hello, you?
That this is the start of his next obsession. But anyway, so this does start with Robin, and in the pilot episode, Ted is at an interesting point in his life. Marshall and Lily just got engaged, and they're both his longtime friends, and now he's thinking about marriage. He feels like he should be taking the next step. And he seems to be saying that he's ready for marriage, or at least he feels like he's being left behind.
Okay, I'm ready. Where is she?
And there she was.
And it's important to note that at this point, Ted seems to be different with his intent as compared to how he was previously. So in future episodes, we find out that he has broken up with women because he wasn't ready for a commitment. So previously, we have some evidence to suggest the fact that Ted was definitely kind of a commitment phobe. And as we find out going forward in the show, Ted is still kind of a commitment phobe, but in this moment, he feels this internal pressure to find someone because Marshall did. So he meets Robin, he flirts with her, he asks her out, and then he goes out on a date. And then when he comes back from the date, he tells Marshall that he met the perfect woman. And he asks Marshall to list for him what he considers to be a perfect woman.
She likes dogs?
I've got 5 dogs.
She drinks scotch?
I love a scotch that's old enough to order its own scotch.
Can quote obscure lines from Ghostbusters?
And she doesn't like olives, which corresponds to Marshall and Lily's theory, the olive theory, that if one person likes olives and the other one doesn't, that makes them a perfect pair because they complement each other. And I know we have to give some grace to the writers with respect to a pilot episode, and I usually do, because I know that when it comes to a pilot episode, there are so many things that tend to be inconsistent with, this happens in so many shows that later on, there are a lot of inconsistencies. At this point, the writers don't know if they're going to be picked up. They're just trying to get their show picked up by a major network. And so not everything's perfect. The writing's not perfect. They're just trying to make it by. And with respect to their date and the things that Ted says makes her an ideal woman, it's not corroborated later in the show. So Ted does say that he wants his ideal woman to love dogs, but dogs don't really come up for Ted in the future. I mean, there's one question that he asks Victoria later, but otherwise, Ted is not presented as someone who's like a major dog lover. In fact, I would argue it's maybe a little bit of the opposite. And of course, there was a bit of an issue with the fact that Josh Radnor, the actor who plays Ted, is allergic to dogs. But regardless, he is the one who tells Robin to get rid of her dogs. And I can't imagine a dog lover doing that. We don't actually see him showing this love of dogs, so it doesn't quite make sense for him to have his ideal woman love dogs because doesn't seem to be a major core or a major aspect of his personality. Same thing with Ghostbusters, that does not come up again. The olive theory is kind of in-universe, doesn't work because we find out that Marshall and Lily love olives. And Scotch, certainly, yes, Ted loves Scotch, but then so does Barney, so does Marshall, and he's not like a Scotch snob, so he is a lover of it, but again, with respect to these things, they all seem to be very surface level and artificial, and none of these things demonstrate the fact that Robin is this perfect match for him. So Robin invites Ted over to her place, but the date is cut short because she's called in to work. But then later, he comes to her place at 1 o'clock in the morning, and he suits up and he steals her the blue French horn, and he shows up at her door. And this is one of those things where, again, maybe a demonstration of the Doppler-Dahmer theory, and also I think a sitcom element to this, and I think not many people can get away with it because Ted and Robin met that day. They met that day and they went on one date, and now Ted is showing up at 1 a.m. outside her door, and Robin does let him up. So according to her, she doesn't find it weird, but I think that some people would be definitely weirded out. I think I would feel a little weird about it. I mean, I could also see someone being accepting of it if Ted is very non-threatening, she doesn't pick up any dangerous vibe. But then when he's over, he tells her that he thinks that he's in love with her, and that naturally freaks her out.
What?
And then he says, I love you again, even after he already apologized. And when he's walking away, he turns around and he says that,
Look, obviously, you can't tell a woman you just met you love her. But it sucks that you can't.
okay, so sure, you can tell someone that you just met that you love them, but that's not love. That's obsession. That's infatuation. That's attachment. You don't really know this person enough to truly love them because what you're looking for is to fulfill a need in yourself. And so you're putting that on another person. And this obsession, usually what it seems to me is that when there's an infatuation and obsession, it almost has nothing to do with the other person and everything to do with the individual who's harboring these feelings. That Ted is feeling this need and he's putting it onto Robin. And I think that this combination of behavior, at this point, I would be weirded out. And when it comes to their date, it just didn't feel that significant, that warranted Ted's behavior later, that warranted this madly in love kind of behavior of showing up in the middle of the night with a blue French horn. And to add on the fact, which I'll touch upon later, but Ted then comes back again. And at that point, it's super weird and it's very concerning. And yes, the show is only about, 22 minutes, and they have to establish all the characters. And it's very difficult to establish such a strong bond and to prove this chemistry so immediately that warrants this behavior. But I think they kind of nailed it when it came to Victoria, honestly. I think that even though Victoria and Ted had a one episode introduction, I think they captured the magic of their chemistry really well. But with Ted and Robin, the date that they showed in the pilot felt kind of not as deep. But again, it's the pilot, so I will let it go. Going forward in the first season, we see that Ted is planning for Robin. In the second episode, he throws 3 parties for Robin in order to get her to come over. And this is where I think Ted's behavior continues to be a little weird for me. He sees when she's at work, so he's watching a news segment, and so he runs to her, shows up where she's working, and makes it seem like he casually ran into her. And then he tells her that he's throwing a party. He changes the date. He throws this party. She doesn't show up. He throws a second party. She doesn't show up. He throws a third party where she finally shows up. If we were watching this from Robin's point of view, I would start thinking that maybe this is not a sitcom because from her perspective, she runs into him and it's apparent that he, is kind of, I don't want to say stalking, but he definitely showed up at her place of work after the date that ended poorly because he came on way too strong, way too soon, and he invites her to 3 parties, and she finds out that he kept throwing parties for her. I think that if we were watching this from the very beginning, from Robin's perspective, we might think that this might be a murder show, to be honest. After this point, I think it becomes a lot more normal with respect to Ted's behavior when it comes to Robin, but in these two first episodes, I feel like it's just really weird with his behavior one after the other. Anyway, so at the very end of the episode, they have a conversation on the roof, they end up kissing, and it's made very clear that Robin can only handle something casual right now and he's too intense for it. And Ted acknowledges the fact that he can't turn off his feelings, that, he still likes her, but I guess they're looking for different things. But that doesn't stop Ted. So in the pineapple incident, we see that Ted gets wasted and he keeps drunk dialing Robin over and over again, leaving her super long messages. One thing I wanted to point out is that there's a moment where Ted comes back to the bar and he uses the word baby doll.
I'm back, baby doll! No can-do'sville, baby doll.
And then the next episode is the limo episode, which is New Year's. And this is where Robin joins the gang because her date is working late. He, quote unquote, stood her up because he's closing a deal in Connecticut. And then Derek, who is Robin's date, shows up.
I cut my meeting short because I wanted to see you at midnight.
And then Ted leaves the limo and Robin comes after him. And he's like, well, what about your date? And she's like,
He kept me waiting and keep him waiting.
Looking at the facts of the situation, I think Robin is being a huge jerk. So what you're telling me is that you're dating a guy who she's been dating since the pineapple incident. So you're not in a relationship, but you're dating someone. And this poor man is stuck closing a deal on New Year's. It's not like he's choosing to do this. This seems to be an urgency thing.
Derek's stuck in Connecticut closing some deal. Who works on New Year's Eve?
And considering the fact that we're talking about Robin, who is the woman of I put my career first, who doesn't seem to be very understanding of the fact that this guy has an urgent business thing. He still makes it all the way back to New York to see her on New Year's. He cuts things short, makes it through traffic to be with her. And what does she do in return? She leaves the limo to go kiss another guy. And she's annoyed with the fact that he kept her waiting. And it's like, woman, your date is 10 feet away. And he was stuck at work and you were blaming him for working. And it almost feels like karma a little bit because later Robin does the same thing. So at Claudia and Stuart's wedding, Robin cancels her date with Ted for work purposes. And so then later, Robin, when she ends early and she goes to see Ted, she sees Ted with Victoria. And it almost feels like the limo episode is a karmic parallel to it. And then Ted meets Victoria. And then he's trying to find Victoria. And we see that Robin has developed feelings for Ted. And she knows who Victoria is. And there's a moment where Robin has the chance to tell him how she feels, but she chooses not to. So there is a little moment where Robin is being selfless because she wants Ted's happiness and she wants Ted to find Victoria. But then we get quite a bit of a reversal of this behavior. So Ted and Victoria are dating and Robin becomes very mean. She's very nasty towards Victoria. I get that this is what the writers were doing in order to bring up comedy, to make it funny that Robin is just so jealous, but it really does make Robin appear very harsh. And then Victoria goes abroad to study in Germany, and then Robin has a terrible day.
Are you a lesbian?
No, are you? And she comes home, she drinks an entire bottle of wine, and it's 2 a.m. and then she calls Ted. And Ted comes over, and then as we know, Ted lies to Robin. He says that he and Victoria broke up, and they both seem to be very happy about it, and they end up hooking up. But then Robin finds out that Ted never broke up with Victoria. And then cutting to the next episode, which is the Llama Award, and Robin is very pissed at Ted for the fact that he lied. And on the one hand, I understand the frustration that she has that Ted did in fact lie, but I think that Robin's anger is misdirected. Based on Robin's behavior in the previous episode, she ended up calling Ted, a man who's in a relationship, at 2 o'clock in the morning and asked him to come over her place. And then as soon as he came over, she offered him liquor. I think that she's in no position to be as pissed as she is. So going forward, they do become friends. And then later, Ted gets a call from Love Solutions saying that they found him the perfect match. And this girl is supposed to be exactly who Ted is looking for. So this is exactly what Ted is looking for. So they set up a date, and then Ted talks to Robin about this perfect date that he has. And it's made clear that Robin is really not into any of these things that he's sharing.
You know, I've been thinking about this. I think I want to have 0 kids.
Really? You don't want kids?
All of these things that he's listing that his perfect match has, Robin's like, this is not it for me.
She loves lasagna.
scarf?
You know, I am sensing a pattern here.
So in this moment, when he gets out of the van, he pictures his wedding day. He can't see his bride, but it's this perfect woman. And he also sees Robin sitting in the bleachers, looking very sad, looking up at him. And I think this is Ted's interpretation of the fact that, well, he thinks that Robin loves him, and so he would be breaking her heart if he marries someone else, and that's why he cancels the date. So that's my interpretation, but it doesn't make sense also to me, because why does Ted think that Robin loves him so much that she would be so sad that he's getting married? So I would love to know what people think of that scene and what the show was trying to say. And after this point, Ted decides that he wants to go after Robin again. So he goes to her apartment and he gets a whole blue orchestra and he gets dozens of roses and he's wearing a suit. And so she comes home and she sees this whole scene, and again she's overwhelmed and she's asking,
what is all of this? I mean, why can't you just say, hey Robin, let's go get some sushi? No, it has to be a string quartet.
And this is where Ted irritates me in this moment, because it's supposed to be romantic, but he's coming on a little too demanding based on how he's showing up. He's kind of demanding an answer from her.
Live in the world, make a mistake, make this mistake.
I need to think about this.
I can't do this anymore. I need an answer.
And even after Robin says no again, Ted is not convinced that it's over. And then later, Robin has and this is another thing that I think kind of bothered me. So Robin goes to the veterinarian because her dog ate some of the chocolate. And as we know, dogs and chocolate do not mix. Very dangerous, very bad for dogs. So not only did Ted kind of break into her apartment to do this whole thing, which she is overwhelmed by. Imagine coming home from work, being exhausted and tired, and now you have to deal with all of this, but he almost killed her dog. And the veterinarian says that Ted is like no other guy, that no other man would do this kind of thing. And it's kind of like trying to convince Robin that this is what she should want. And I think what the show's trying to say and how it came off is quite different, at least to me. You can't force someone to like that, and you can't force someone to like you. And also, he almost killed her dog. So after this, Robin does kind of think about it and she thinks, well, you're right, Ted is kind of special. And then Ted does this whole thing of the rain dance and he makes it rain and they kiss in the rain and they start dating.
So where does that leave us?
There are a lot of opinions as to how this relationship went, and I think there are a lot of extreme opinions. On the one hand, there are people who feel like the show demonstrates the fact that they were perfect together, and the only thing that really broke them apart is the fact that Ted wanted to get married and have kids and Robin didn't, and that really was the main issue in their relationship. And then there are other people who think that the show demonstrates the fact that they're completely wrong for each other, that they're very incompatible, and that there's no way that this couple works because of all the fights and issues that they've had. But for me personally, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I think that when it comes to Robin and Ted, I think they were fine. As a couple, I think they were fine. I don't think that the show was trying to show the fact that they were just completely incompatible and there were tons of issues between them, because there are also lots of episodes showing that they did work together and they are friends. And on the other hand, I don't think the show demonstrated the fact that the only thing that they had that was a point of contention for them is the fact that Ted wanted to get married and have kids. So I'm going to summarize both the good and the bad when it comes to this relationship. And to start from the beginning, Ted and Robin are very lovey-dovey together, and it's used as a contrast to Marshall's situation because Marshall's going through something terrible. There are some inconsistencies when it comes to their relationship. For example, Robin and Ted are using pet names in this episode.
Teddy bear?
But later on, we find out that Robin hates pet names and she gets mad at Ted every time he tries to use them.
I don't do nicknames.
Finish with the sports page, Sherbs?
Seriously? Stop.
And we also get a significant episode with Ted's parents when Ted finds out that his parents are divorced. And we see that Ted's mom and dad are a direct parallel to Robin and Ted.
Your father's kind of a head in the clouds romantic, and I'm much more down to earth.
And his dad says that when you don't connect on so many fundamental levels, it's only a matter of time before you break up.
No, when you don't connect on that many fundamental levels, it's only a matter of time before you realize you're not meant to be together.
And we see that Ted is very upset by this naturally, but we also see that Ted's parents are still great friends and they're very amicable with each other and they get along great and they don't have any hard feelings towards each other. And even though they're older and the mom is dating somebody else, they seem fine and they seem to have moved on. So it doesn't seem to be a tragic ending, but it does seem to be a tragic blow to Ted's perception. So now focusing on their relationship with the good and the bad, starting with the good. Ted and Robin have quite a few episodes where they're just a basic couple, where they're just acting like friends, but in a relationship. We see that when James Stinson comes to visit, Robin and Ted are just in their established couple bubble and they don't want to go out and they're just behaving very normally. And we also see that Robin is very proud of Ted for his architectural design. And so she does seem to be supportive. And there's also the episode where Robin tells Ted that she loves him. And in the episode, we get a huge montage of how they are as a couple, that Robin does appreciate all the things that Ted does for her. So Ted takes care of her when she's sick. Ted kills a spider for her. And so we see that there are moments between Robin and Ted when they're both understanding. So there's a moment where Robin's sister, Katie, asks Robin, "Do you love Ted?" And Robin can't answer. She feels very tongue-tied. And Ted steps in saying, "It's okay, you don't have to say anything." So he takes the pressure off.
Just let me explain.
You don't have to explain anything. You don't have to say it. It's fine.
So in this episode, it does show that they have moments between them where they're supportive, and this show does tend to be somewhat inconsistent. Again, we could pin this on the fact that Ted is an unreliable narrator and generally memory is faulty. And when it comes to this love montage, we see that Robin appreciates the fact that Ted kills a spider for her and he takes care of her when she's sick. But in a later episode, a few seasons down the line, Ted shares his frustration with Robin with the fact that he never felt needed, that she never made him feel needed in a relationship.
I got this.
Is this okay? Am I hurting you?
I got this.
Whoa! Ugh! Someone's trying to break in. Call the cops.
I got this.
Robin gets frustrated with the fact that Ted killed a spider for Becky and how Becky's acting like a little girl. But in this montage with Ted and Robin, Ted also kills a spider for Robin. And there are different ways to explain this. The most basic way is the fact that seasons go on and streaming wasn't available, and so this show is inconsistent, like many shows are, and it's fine. We just have to live with it. And the other aspect is faulty memory, and no one remembers things perfectly, but we could also just adopt this element of the fact that these things may not have happened specifically, but a person always remembers how they made them feel. So what Ted is sharing is not the specific memory, but a feeling, a sensation. So both things could be true. He might have felt that Robin never made him feel needed, and that may have been true because that's how he felt in the relationship. And also, he may have felt like he was doing things for Robin that made her eventually say, "I love you." And I think both of these things can be true and both of these things can be consistent if we just not focus on the specific elements and the facts that happened. So now getting to the bad parts of their relationship. And Ted and Robin do have a few fights while they're dating. One fight is the fact that Robin is bored with Ted's stories.
I listen to your work stories all the time.
Yeah, but and I don't want to be rude here, but my work stories are interesting.
By the end of the episode, Robin does come around and she decides that she will listen to Ted's stories because she felt threatened by the fact that Ted might leave. And at the very end, we see that Robin is proud of him for his architectural design. Although at the same time, I feel like, is this new interest genuine? Does she really care about his stories, or is she only doing it because she's afraid of losing something? So it's a compromise of the fact that she doesn't actually care about his day, but she's willing to listen to his boring stories because she doesn't want him to cheat on her. And then another fight that they have is about Robin's secret about being Robin Sparkles when Ted finds out that Robin is afraid of malls and he asks her why. And I feel like I kind of see both sides in this argument. I think that Ted becomes overly pushy, but I also think that Robin was wrong for lying. So here's what I mean. So initially, Robin doesn't want to tell Ted the truth. And I understand why Ted asked her privately because they are in a relationship. But also Robin at the same time had every right to say, look, I'm not ready to share this information with you. I want to keep this a secret. So there was nothing wrong with Ted initially asking, and there was nothing wrong with Robin saying no. And then the second time around, I think that Ted was putting unnecessarily amount of pressure. So they already had this conversation, but he still kept insisting that she open up. And she's just not in that space. She's not ready for that next stage of a relationship where she's willing to be completely open about everything. And he had to respect boundaries. And I feel like the fact that he kept pushing just seems a violation of her space. But also at the same time, she should have just stood her ground and been honest in saying, look, I don't want to share. And she didn't have to lie about it. So at the end of the day, in this episode, Ted comes around and at the end he says, Robin doesn't have to tell me anything. She doesn't have to tell you guys anything. I respect her privacy. So far with the fights, we see that they have both resolved their issues, with Robin coming around and now Ted kind of coming around. And then their third fight is about stuff. Specifically about exes and the stuff that people leave behind. So, can you keep something from your ex? And I do think it's an interesting subject matter. I feel like they fudged up this episode personally. So, their intent was to get rid of the dogs. And the way that they decided to do it is that these dogs are supposedly from Robin's exes, and Ted asks Robin to get rid of the dogs. But if someone is truly a dog person, I cannot imagine asking someone to get rid of their dogs. So it doesn't make sense. And also the fact that Robin has dated so many people that have left their dogs behind also just feels a little too weird and coincidental. And so I really feel like they could have done a completely different storyline or just slightly different that would have made Ted less of an asshole, because it just feels so harsh. If I were to change the episode, I would have still kept the storyline of Robin being upset that Ted has all of his ex's stuff, because I think it's a fun subject to explore. And then at the same time, I would have had Ted maybe walking Robin's dogs one time as a favor, and him getting really upset with the fact that she has 5 dogs in a New York City apartment. So as a dog lover, I could absolutely see someone getting really upset by being like, oh my gosh, now I'm really looking at how these dogs are living and I hate this. And so then Ted getting upset with Robin and asking her to get rid of the dogs, but to give them to a place that, they could actually enjoy their space, to family, and her being upset with him because she loves her dog, she doesn't want to get rid of him, and she may think that he's being condescending. So I think that would have been an interesting storyline, because you could have sympathized with both parties, sympathizing with Ted because I think he's absolutely right, because you don't want to have 5 dogs in a New York City apartment and it's not fair to them, and it's maybe a 1-bedroom, and sympathize with Robin with the fact that it's so hard to get rid of your pets and feeling like another person is putting, the moral high ground over you. And so I feel like that could have been a much better way to address this subject, but that's not how it plays out. How it plays out is that I think that Ted is being a dick because he tells Robin to get rid of her dogs because they came from exes, which I think is really harsh, but she follows through with it. And in return, he pretends to get rid of all his ex's stuff, but he doesn't, and he brings it back. I don't know what the show's trying to say, that Ted is just an absolute jerk and he can't compromise and he doesn't really care what Robin thinks, even though Robin accommodated. And out of all this scenario, they end up fighting and then they decide to move in together. And this leads us to their next fight, which is they're moving in. And when Ted moves in, Robin doesn't want to share her space with him. So it's her place and she treats it like her place, and she likes her stuff the way that they are. And even when Ted wants to just move in his pot lids, she's like, no, we'll put this in the storage unit. And through this episode, we also see that Robin is not ready to move in. So when Ted is out at the bar with Barney and he's telling Barney, look, I want to go back to Robin. It's our first night together and I'm sure she wants to spend the first night together. We see that Robin is in the bathtub, smoking a cigarette, and enjoying her last night alone.
This might be our last hurrah, my little friend.
She's not wishing that Ted was there with her celebrating their first night together. No, she's enjoying her alone time because that's what she wants. And while Ted is out, she's calling different subscriptions, such as the subscription to Guns and Ammo, because she has to hide things from Ted and hide aspects of her personality. To be fair, I think that if you're not ready, the best thing to do is not to push yourself and to just share the fact that you don't want to move in. Of course, a person can make a mistake and say, they think they could be ready for this stage, but they're really not. But it was very clear that she wasn't. She didn't want this. And from Ted's perspective, he wants to move forward, and they agreed to this. And so moving into a space where you are treated like a guest, that you can't change anything, is also challenging. And then we get to their final fight, which leads to their breakup. So they go out to dinner, and Robin sees an engagement ring at the bottom of her champagne glass.
No, Ted, you cannot do this to me, no.
And Ted is like, oh, that's not my ring. And he's a little upset with how she reacted because they've already been dating for a year.
Even though you don't want to get married, I'd like to think the fact that we've been together for a year and that we love each other might get me a gentler reaction than no.
And this is where they have a conversation about their different goals and where they want to be in life. And ultimately, they end up breaking up because they realize that they want different things out of life. after Ted and Robin break up, the show seems to be kind of inconsistent with how they treat their relationship. So right after the breakup, we see that they both take time to recover, and Robin rebounds with Gael, and Ted tries to be mature about it. And then by episode 3, we see that they're just moving on with their lives. They're dating other people. It seems like they're just straight in friendship territory. But then in episode 9, we find out that they've been kind of awkward with each other. So it's Thanksgiving, and Robin is dating Bob, who Ted thinks is like a million years old, but he's only in his early 40s. And Robin and Ted are together baking pies, and then they end up sleeping together. And Robin is dating Bob. She's not in a relationship, she's not cheating, but it's just another time where Robin keeps going back to Ted when she's with somebody else, and then Bob comes to Thanksgiving dinner, and it's just so awkward because they backslid. But from this episode, they do truly become friends, and we don't actually get to hear about their relationship for a good while. And then at the end of season 3, Barney sleeps with Robin. Ted finds out about this, and he's extremely pissed at Barney. And this is a question I wanted to ask for the audience because I think that this scenario is kind of interesting. So, is Ted justified in being pissed off at Barney? And I do understand on the one hand that friendships are special, and there's always this unspoken rule that you never go for the ex of one of your close friends. I would love to know what people think of this particular scenario. Is Ted justified in ending the friendship with Barney over the fact that he slept with Robin, considering the fact that they broke up a year ago and considering the fact that Ted is supposedly happy with Stella? Now, Ted's decision to end his friendship with Barney for other reasons, I think would be valid, but focusing on just sleeping with Robin, how much is it justified from Ted's perspective? And I don't have a final opinion on this, I just really want to know what people think. And then we get to Ted and Stella's wedding, and Robin shows up, and she says that she feels uncomfortable going to his wedding because she's an ex. And she says a few things that are just phrased really poorly.
I just thought if I ever changed my mind about marriage and kids, it was nice to know that you were there.
It really does give this impression that Ted is just her backup plan, and it comes off that way, and I think it makes sense for Ted's perspective to be upset by what she said because that's how it feels. And the other thing that Robin says that I think is interesting is how Ted shouldn't get married.
You're just disappearing into someone else's wedding, someone else's house, someone else's life without a second thought.
I almost feel like the writers want us to agree with Robin in this case, but maybe I'm off. Maybe it's just them trying to express how Robin feels, but it again falls back on this notion that this is necessary for Ted, and that this is a necessary aspect of love. And I don't think that there should be anything wrong with taking over someone's wedding. And if you truly love somebody, who cares? If you love the person, none of these things should matter. You don't need that grandiose fairy tale wedding and fairy tale story. That's not what makes it love. And Ted just deserves to be with someone who loves him and appreciates him and who he loves and appreciates. And that's what matters. And that's not what the show seems to be kind of focusing on in this conversation. Again, perhaps it's not the writers inserting themselves so much as they're just trying to express what Robin feels. So then the wedding blows up. Robin comes back from Japan and she has no place to live, so she moves in with Ted and they become roommates. They start fighting all the time. And to resolve this issue, they start sleeping together, but it's a very casual friends with benefits situation so that they don't fight. And they try to set some ground rules. They try to stop, but then they keep falling back into it. So this is kind of the second time that they've backslid. But then Ted finally decides to stop it because he notices that Barney likes Robin. And then Robin makes a pact with Ted that if they're both still single by the time they're 40, that they're gonna marry each other. And then Barney asks Ted if he can go for Robin, if he can ask her out. And Ted gives him his permission. And then when Barney's dating Robin, Ted decides to help Barney out. So he starts to pick up on the fact that Robin might break up with Barney.
Maybe he just doesn't have it in him. Maybe this whole thing's a big mistake.
And because of that, Ted steps in and he uses all his knowledge on Robin to help out Barney. And then after Barney and Robin break up, Robin dates Don and she wants to move in with Don. And Ted is encouraging her to move out.
I see how happy you are, and as much as I love you as a roommate, I want you to do what's right for you.
Oh, Are you trying to kick me out because of the milk thing?
It's really annoying.
And Barney doesn't want her to move in with Don because now Barney feels jealous, but Ted is trying to knock some sense into him. He's like, listen, I always write myself a letter to explain to myself why I should not get back together with a person. And Ted pulls out the letter he wrote about Robin. But the things that he writes about her, I think are quite interesting.
Still, I'll always remember stealing her the blue French horn, our first kiss, the look in her eye when she told me she loved me.
And when it comes to these things, and when it comes to the blue French horn, which gets brought up so much, I just can't help but think about the Ben Franklin effect, which doesn't 100% apply, but here's what I mean by this. So the Ben Franklin effect is a situation where doing a favor for somebody or being kindly towards somebody else actually makes you like them more. So it's not the person who's receiving the benefit, but the person who's giving the benefit who is starting to like the individual because of the actions that they're taking. And this is to dissipate cognitive dissonance. So if you're feeling neutral towards somebody, if you don't like them, if you're behaving towards them in a way that indicates that you like them, that makes you change your mind about them. And I've seen the same thing happen with caretaking, that if you're briefly taking care of somebody else, then you develop a stronger bond, and that caretaking makes you bond stronger to the other person. And I think that this also goes for grand gestures. Anytime that you're doing things for somebody else, you're the one who's developing the attachment. And it's not just the other individual who feels grateful for what you're doing. It's your actions that you're taking that make you psychologically then like the other person. Of course, on the long term, things may change, that if you're a long-term caretaker, someone may still develop resentment and burnout. But short term and doing favors, doing kind things towards someone would make you like the other person. And that's what I always think of when I think of the blue French horn. What he's writing down, and I think that's so interesting, is that what he's writing down about why he loves Robin really doesn't seem to be that much to do with Robin. He is the one who stole the blue French horn. He took the action, and is this grandiose action, the fact that he stole something, that makes it seem like he likes her more, but that has nothing to do with her. I mean, why does the letter about why he loves her so much include the fact that this is what he stole, that this is one of the main things that he had to focus on, that it's his own behavior? Same thing with him kissing her on the roof. It's not something that demonstrates their deep love for each other. He kissed her on the roof and then they decided that they're not going to date. Or basically, more straightforward, she said no. So these things I feel like are not really a demonstration. And I think it's just an interesting writing choice to keep coming back to these things because I don't think that they show what the show's trying to show. But maybe that's just me. So back to the story, Ted and Barney vie for Robin's attention, and at the end of it, Robin is like, listen guys, I need to take a break from the group.
Don's not going to be a part of the group, and neither am I. At least for a while. Guys, this thing with Don is real.
I think that this shows a high level of maturity and an evolution in Robin's progress, and something that Ted hasn't been able to do, but Robin has, that she kind of comprehends why this type of relationship is unhealthy. But then sadly, Don breaks up with Robin by taking the job in Chicago, and Robin is devastated. And when she's devastated and she's on the couch with Ted, she almost kisses him. And we have a scene, which I mentioned before, of when Ted says that Robin never made him feel needed. There's also another inconsistency where the fact that Robin would be the one paying for pizza all the time, but in season 9, there's an issue that comes up with the fact that Robin is extremely wealthy and she never picks up the tab. So that whole montage is just kind of all over the place. And then in a later episode, Barney tries to give out cards to his friends to impress his father so that they have to have alternate identities. And he makes Robin date Ted, in a fake way. And Robin is disappointed by this.
Robin, you're dating Ted.
Oh man! Why?
Which I think is interesting because I feel like the show kind of goes back and forth with how they feel towards each other. And it almost feels like they want to keep the storyline alive because they wrote the ending already, but also at the same time, I feel like they don't want to belabor a certain point. In season 7, it seems like the writers realized that they have to progress the Robin and Ted storyline because before season 7, it seems like their romantic interest in each other wasn't really addressed that much. Again, we did have some glimmers of it, but it wasn't like a consistent through line of their relationship. But then halfway through season 7, we get a big return to Ted and Robin. So in Symphony of Illumination, Robin gets sad news from the doctor and she's very upset. She doesn't tell anybody what's wrong, but Ted decides to cheer her up anyway. And he does this whole giant display for her, a Christmas display for her that's very cute and heartwarming, and she's very touched by it. And later, Marshall has a conversation with Ted about this, and he says,
"You're in love with Robin. Do you remember back at Christmas when she was upset, you didn't even know why, and you spent 8 hours setting up Christmas lights in the apartment just to cheer her up?"
Like, clearly you still love her if you are willing to do this type of thing. But then Marshall's like,
"Ted, let me ask you a question. Would you have done that for me?"
You probably would have. You're such a good friend, Ted.
You too, buddy.
and I kind of think that Marshall may be right in this. So Ted has two sides to him when it comes to friendship. On the one hand, I think that he's actually a really good friend to his group. But on the other hand, I think that when it comes to a woman, he becomes kind of a jerk when it comes to his friends, or he starts to neglect his friends in the interest of a romantic partner.
I'm jeopardizing my law career so you can throw not one, not two, but 3 parties for some girl that you just met who's probably not even gonna show up.
But outside of that, I feel like Ted is shown to be the kind of friend who would do these things. So Ted is the one who sold his car when Marshall and Lily were struggling financially. Ted remembered after 9 years that Lily wanted an easy bake oven. Ted is the one who gave Barney his blessing. Ted is the one who tried to help Barney out in his relationship, even though that goes against his interest. So I do think that Ted sacrifices and does big gestures for his friends. However, Ted has been a complete jerk when it comes to a relationship.
Dad, you brought 2 grocery bags and a woman we've never seen before. "Hi, I'm Marshall. Welcome to our home." Start talking.
So there's both sides to Ted, but I do agree with Marshall that when it comes to this big gesture that he did for Robin, I could kind of see Ted doing this as a friend. I could see him doing this for Marshall. So I don't think that that example is necessary to show that that's his feelings for Robin. But then in this season, we do get clear confirmation that Ted still wants to be with Robin. So when Robin breaks up with Kevin, because Robin tells Kevin, "Look, I don't want to have kids," and Ted comes home and he sees Robin on the roof and he tells her, "Well, I don't care and I love you and we don't need to have kids." So the relationship is back on the table. Robin says she wants to talk about it, and then she goes off on assignment to Russia. When she comes back, she tells him that she doesn't love him and she decides to move out because Marshall tells her that she should move out. So this particular scenario with Robin telling Ted that she doesn't love him could be interpreted in 2 ways. One way is that that's how Robin feels. She loves him as a friend, but she doesn't have those romantic feelings towards him. Or it could be interpreted as because Robin really cares for Ted, that she wouldn't want Ted to let go of his dreams of having marriage and a family. So it could be looked at in both ways, and I feel like both interpretations are valid, to be honest. On the one hand, she kind of did the same thing with Victoria. When Ted was looking for Victoria, Robin kind of sacrificed her need to be with Ted, and she didn't say that she liked him because she wanted Ted to find happiness, but then she kind of backpedaled because she was super mean to Victoria. And later on, at the wedding, I think that there's a bit of a contradiction as to how selfless Robin can be with respect to Ted. So it does go back and forth. But anyway, so Robin moves out and Ted tells her, "Look, I can't have this deal with you of when we're single and we're 40 that we'll still get married because I'll still be waiting for you," which is fair. So Ted, on his part, is doing a smart thing by letting go of that possibility of getting together when they're 40. And when Robin moves out, Ted decides to pick up a whole bunch of hobbies, and he still has this ghost of Robin around because he can't let her go. And ultimately, he decides to move out of the apartment to give the apartment to Lily and Marshall because they hate the suburbs. And when he talks to Robin, I like what he says.
But I guess it's better to face it and move on than try to force something that just isn't meant to be, right?
So then Ted starts online dating to get over Robin, but every time he goes on a date, he sees Robin and he can't let her go. He kind of sees her everywhere because a part of him feels guilty for the fact that he decided to end the friendship. So they become friends again, and Robin tells Ted to go after Victoria, so he does. And during this whole drama thing, we also see Robin pining for Barney. So they just feels like in this season, they were just shoving a whole bunch of different elements in. So then Barney starts dating Patrice, and Barney tells Ted that he's going to propose to Patrice at top of the Worldwide News building. So this whole thing with the proposal, I hate it. I hate all of it. Maybe I'll talk about it someday, but I don't like it. Anyway, this scenario, again, too grandiose and maybe a little too sitcom-y, where Barney only tells Ted, and so Ted has a dilemma of should he tell Robin because he knows that Robin likes Barney, and so ultimately Ted does decide to tell Robin, which is his way of letting her go, which is his way of showing that he wants Robin to be happy. At the same time, though, wouldn't that also suggest that Ted doesn't care about Barney's happiness? So this whole time, Barney was treating this as a test to see if Ted is willing to let Robin go and to give his blessing. But according to Ted, he thinks that Barney is going to propose to Patrice. And if he's letting Robin go and ruin the engagement, that would suggest that Ted is willing to sabotage Barney's happiness. Am I wrong here? So then Ted finds out that Barney is engaged to Robin, so Barney texts him, and at this time he's at his grand opening of the building that he designed. And quite a few people have commented at the fact that everyone's being a jerk to Ted in this moment, that Barney chose to propose on the night of such a big thing for Ted, that this is the grand opening of the building that he designed in New York City, which has been his dream for years. And it's his day, his moment to celebrate. And so Barney chose that day specifically to steal it from him and to propose to a woman that Ted loves. So that's kind of a stab in the back. And then less so is Marshall and Lily asking to leave early to spend time together because they don't get a night away. Which, I mean, yes, also kind of rude, but you know, they're new parents, they're underslept, they're tired, more forgiving than what Barney does. And then we get to another plot point which I don't like, which is the locket. So basically, when Robin was 14, she buried a locket in Central Park, signifying that's the locket that she would wear when she gets married, which doesn't seem consistent with Robin's character, but I understand people change over time, people are different, people are complex, so whatever. I can buy the fact that when Robin was 14, she had this dream of unburying this locket and getting married wearing it. And I just think that it's a little weird that now, like older Robin in season 8, is the one who would be going to Central Park and freaking out over a locket. I don't think it's that consistent, and it just doesn't seem that consistent to me, but fine. So Robin is trying to find this locket and she gets frazzled. She can't find it anywhere. She calls Barney, who is unavailable. Then she calls Ted, who shows up, and Robin is putting so much weight on this locket. It's very symbolic for her.
This is a sign.
That means that this is a sign from the universe that she shouldn't get married. And at this point, Ted is being the reasonable one.
Maybe we don't need the universe to tell us what we really want. Maybe we already know that.
And later, when Ted talks to Lily about it, he gives a whole speech about how he would do anything to make Robin happy.
If I could make that locket magically appear, I would. I would open a vein in my arm if I could bleed that locket out just to make her happy.
And we also find out that Lily knows what happened. So when Robin got wasted one night before Stella and Ted's wedding, she went to Central Park, she dug up the locket, she was wearing it, and then she put it in a pencil box. And Robin says that she wanted to wear it when she married Ted. And she also says that she went to Japan partially because she was trying to get away from the wedding of Ted and Stella, that she couldn't just witness them together. So then we get to season 9 and Barney and Robin's wedding. And one night, Barney runs away, and so Ted and Robin are looking for him. And Robin still continues to express the fact that she's having doubts about the marriage. Ted confesses the fact that he still loves Robin, basically. So he tells her that the reason why he and Victoria broke up is because of her, that he didn't want to end his friendship with her. And when Robin goes through his top 5 best relationships...
You want to talk about my top 5? There's no top 5, Robin. There's just a top 1, and it's you.
So there are a few things that I find interesting about this conversation. The one thing is that Robin says that she would have understood. She would have been very sympathetic if Ted ended the friendship for Victoria, because we do see that Robin kind of does the same thing. She doesn't cut them off completely, but she creates distance as necessary for the sake of the relationship. So she was willing to do what Ted didn't want to do, but I believe her when she says I would have understood, because she understands this element. She understands the risks and the harms of being friends with an ex so closely when you're in a relationship. So there's that component. And the other component is, I think it's interesting that Ted is saying all these things the night before her wedding. I don't think the writers were trying to make this seem manipulative. And I don't think that the way that Ted is expressing this, the way that Josh Radnor is acting out the scene, that he's trying to be manipulative in any way. But, you know, previously he chose to keep this information from Robin. He asked Marshall and Lily, please don't tell her that I broke up with Victoria for her. I don't want her to know that. But he's bringing all of this up to say something like there's only a top 1, which is you, before her wedding, just seems like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, clearly you're trying to sabotage something, subconsciously, at least perhaps. There's just, Yeah, I mean, at the end of this episode, he lets her go, metaphorically. And so it's meant to be a sign that he is indeed ready to move on. But this whole thing just feels like a continuation of why he went to get the locket. That, as everybody pointed out, this locket is almost a secret way of him trying to sabotage the relationship.
And I assume this is all in the hopes that Robin will ditch her own wedding and run off with you?
What?
And as we find out, Ted reached out to Stella to find the pencil box. Then he flew to her storage unit in Los Angeles to look for it, couldn't find it. Then he reached out to Victoria, and it turns out Victoria had the locket the whole time. It was around her neck. And when he calls her, which, by the way, the gall to do that. He's calling Victoria, asking for Robin's locket, and Victoria is just being such a champ. She has no hard feelings. She's like, oh, you want this thing? Like, clearly, you're trying to get Robin back, but she's like, whatever, I'll send it back to you. You know, no hard feelings.
So this bakery, what kind of...
You want me to send you some chocolate truffle Streuselkuchen?
Yes, please, you're the best.
So Victoria is being absolutely awesome with this, but then Jeannette intercepts the package, and Ted meets Jeannette on a bridge, and she's about to sacrifice the locket. And I think that the speech that Ted gives is also very interesting.
If you're looking for the word that means caring about someone beyond all rationality and wanting them to have everything they want, no matter how much it destroys you, it's love.
Ted's speech about love, I think, is supposed to be horseshit, in my opinion. I don't think that we're supposed to believe Ted, or we're supposed to believe him that he thinks this, but we're not supposed to take it as truth or some kernel of knowledge about what love really is. It seems like he's being a little manic, and what he's saying doesn't seem to be reflective of what love really is. It seems like what he has is an unhealthy attachment to an idea. He's not even, to me, the speech doesn't seem like he's even attached to a person, but he's attached to this idea of what love is supposed to be. And even Jeannette calls him crazy. So it's like, when you have someone like Jeannette being like, you've lost your mind, maybe she has a point. And like I've said in my previous video with Jeannette, I think that Ted did lose his mind, and I think that the episodes with Jeannette were supposed to show that. And the conversation with Mike Tyson, where he's like, well, if a woman's acting crazy, look at the guy that she's with. So what Ted is really saying in the speech is that if you could just accept people's advice and move on, then it wouldn't be love, it'd be disposable. That love requires you to be unable to move on. That's what love is.
If I could just, take the whole world's advice and move on and find someone else, that wouldn't be love. That would be some other disposable thing.
And that's just not true. I mean, it goes against the popular adage that if you love someone, let them go. That's what love is. Love is letting go for the sake of their happiness, not holding on. And the fact that Ted is holding on, I think he just fell in love with the idea of love. And this whole thing with the locket just annoys me. And I don't know if I could put it into words. I just think that for a character like Robin, I expect better from her. Like, I would expect this from Ted, but not from Robin. And in a way, it almost feels like it cheapens what the writers are trying to do with Robin and Ted. So what the writers are trying to convey is that Ted comes through for Robin. And that's her final message to him, that she wants to be with someone who comes through for her. She wants to be with someone who goes big for her.
Shouldn't I be with the guy who finds me my locket? The guy who steals me the blue French horn?
First of all, Ted at least tries to be mature about this, and by giving the locket away to Barney and by explaining to Robin that, look, this is not what you want. It just seems like Robin is looking for any type of excuse. That's what it seems like, because after Ted says no, she's like, well, I'm going to run away by myself, which seems like it's not even about Ted at all. It's like, well, it's clear that you're using any possible excuse, even after everything has been clarified for you, and Ted says no. It's like, I still don't want to get married. So it's like, well, then it seems like you're hesitant about the marriage and not because you specifically want Ted. But at the end of the day, Robin, when she's running away, she runs into Barney, and then they reconcile and they get married. So now on to the ending.
And that, kids, is how I met your mother.
Robin and Barney get divorced, and Robin distances herself from the group. So the gang mentions how they never see Robin anymore.
No, Sasquatch is a warm and affectionate creature. At this point, Robin's more like the Yeti, cold and aloof.
And we cut forward to a few years down the line, and Robin is at a Halloween party, and she's very sad. She's sad when she's looking at Ted and Tracy. She sees that Barney is hitting on women.
My ex-husband hitting on slutty cops right in front of me, and it's the guy I probably should have ended up with the beautiful mother of his child.
And then we fast forward to the very ending, where Tracy passes away and Barney becomes a father, and Ted finishes his story. And the kids are like,
this is a story about how you're totally in love with Aunt Robin.
So Ted shows up with a blue French horn outside Robin's door, closing the circle on the story. Now, as most people know, the ending of How I Met Your Mother is notoriously hated. Of course, there are people who are fans of the ending. And when I first watched the ending, I think that I had a very, neutral reaction to it because I had stopped watching the show around season 6, I would say, the first time around. And then years later, I went back and I finished the rest of the show. So by the time that I was watching the ending, I was more detached from the show and I didn't really feel as connected to the characters. I still wanted to see what would happen, but I didn't feel as connected. So when the ending came around and I saw it, I thought, okay, well, this makes sense. Because from a narrative perspective, it works. It makes sense in terms of the parallel, the symmetry of the story starting with Robin and the focus of the first 2 seasons being about Robin. And so she started the journey for Ted. And so it makes sense that Ted is telling the story about Robin because she's the constant through line of this story. It starts with Robin, and throughout the seasons, even though not every single season focuses on her, she is still mentioned, and the romantic interest between Robin and Ted is still mentioned. So narratively, in that sense, it makes sense. So I completely get the justification. However, I just don't agree with the execution. And I think that the story could have still made sense without having Ted and Robin end up together. Because really, when we are looking at Ted as a character, the start of his journey begins in the pilot. It's the point where he has a new goal. His new goal is to be in a relationship to get married. And previously, it suggested the fact that he wasn't striving for this. Maybe he liked people and he wanted to be with people, but this idea of a commitment in marriage started in the pilot. He felt this pressure, but he was grossly unaware of what love should look like. So it was the beginning of his journey to understand what love really is. And so we get to see the start of his journey in the pilot. And then throughout the seasons, we see him exploring relationships and trying to understand what he's looking for, what he really wants, and what love truly is. Because it's not until Jeannette that we really find out that he wasn't ready and that he was lying to himself. And as he said,
I'm ready to settle down.
And kids, for the first time in my life, I really meant it.
So when we're looking at the pilot, he didn't really mean it then. He thought he did, but he was wrong. So this entire journey, this entire show is about his own personal growth. And we could still take out Robin out of it, and it's still very much about who he had to become in order to actually find a relationship. So in that sense, narratively, it could have still worked if Ted didn't end up with Robin. And in that vein, we could see how the pilot episode and Ted's date with Robin is very much relevant to Ted's relationship with Tracy, because on the first date with Robin, Ted tells Robin that he loves her. He comes off as very intense, but by the time that we get to Ted's first date with Tracy, we see that he walks away, and he makes it a point to say that he is walking away, that he's not going to chase her. And it's very significant for us as the audience because we saw the journey that he went on. We saw where he started out. And that starting point is very critical to his ending point with Tracy, that we had to see these years of him messing up over and over again and him behaving erratically and just in a way that is not great for a relationship. And he had to get to this very final point. So everything starting with Robin up until the point that he meets Tracy is still relevant to his relationship with Tracy. But to defend the writers a little bit here, it does make sense. So the ending still makes sense based on how they structured the story. And like I said, when I did see the ending, my thought was, okay, this makes sense because it does tie back in. And I might be in the minority with this, but when it comes to a writer's decision to end their story a certain way, or for a creator to create their story in the way that they want to, I feel like they have every right to do so. So is it a slap in the face from the writer's perspective to end their story in this way, given the fact that most of the audience didn't want it? And I think on the one hand, I think that someone who creates their story has a right to tell their story the way that it is. And so even if I don't like the ending, I will support the writer's decision to write their story the way that they want to, if that's what they truly believed in, if this is the vision that they've had, and if they were trying to say something with this particular ending, then I will fully support it. And as the audience, we have every right to bash it and to hate it. So if we don't like something, we have every right to say so. So I'm fully in support of if the writers believe that this is still the ending that they believe in, and they let it play out the way that they want it to, and this is their story to tell, and I think that that's great. And so I'm in full support of it, even if everybody hates it. Not everybody does, but even if the whole world hated it, I would still defend their right to share their story the way that they want to. And when it comes to the mother, aka Tracy, I also feel like the writers didn't really give her enough screen time. And I feel like she wasn't fleshed out sufficiently as a character. On the one hand, it is great that they introduced her, so they could have done the bare minimum and they could have just had Ted meet Tracy in one episode at the very end. They didn't do that. Thankfully, at least they gave her some episodes. They gave her an entire episode to give the whole backstory. They gave us scenes with Ted and Tracy. So they didn't keep it to the bare minimum. And so I don't think that the writers were trying to make her disposable. But at the same time, I think she's only in about 14 episodes. So Kristen Miliotti's in about 14 episodes, even though she's credited for every single episode in the 9th season. But she doesn't appear that much. And even though we get a few, I would say, flaws, like I discussed in my video on Tracy, they could have given her more permission to be more flawed or to see more of her so that we would have had critiques like she's too perfect or people couldn't connect with her because they felt that she was too perfect. So by doing so, they kind of distanced her from the rest of the group. And by killing her off, and I think that's the big element, is that if they were going to kill her off, which is what they did, then it would have been more justified to flesh out her character even more and to allow the audience to spend more time with this character. Ted's relationship with Cindy, who is Tracy's roommate, is really the only time that we really get to know Tracy before we get to meet her. We don't really find out much about her personality at all. She's a blank slate. And based on the fact that the writers had made the ending already by the beginning of season 2, we know that they didn't really care about the mother because from the beginning, they knew they were going to kill her off, or at least starting with the 2nd season, they knew they were going to kill her off. And the preceding seasons do indicate that they didn't devote much attention to her because they knew they weren't going to care about her that much. So if I was doing the last season, what I would have loved to do is to make Tracy the focal point of some of the episodes. So not to just devote one episode to her, but multiple, to really flesh out this character. And I think that this would have provided so much satisfaction to the audience to really see what Ted has been seeking, because by killing her off, which I also think makes sense from a narrative perspective, I think that is an aspect that upsets the audience less as compared to Ted and Robin. I've seen quite a few comments where people have said that they accept Tracy's passing, but it's the fact that Ted goes back to Robin that they're disappointed by, and not so much about Tracy's passing. And I think that if they really wanted to make a tragic ending, that they would have given us this character a little bit more. And it is an interesting choice for a comedy to make the ending so depressing, because when you think about it, what we're seeing is it's a very happy sitcom, and at the very end, the whole show is about this guy who's looking for his soulmate, and he's been beat down plenty of times. He makes tons and tons of mistakes, but we also see that he becomes more depressed and more hopeless towards the end. And after 9 years, we see that he finally gets it together. He starts to figure things out, and he finds his perfect woman. And it takes him 9 years of this journey, and then he gets about 9 years with her. And combining that with the fact that he has 2 young kids that he now has to raise on his own, who lost their mother. And it's just it's real, but it's very depressing for a sitcom. And it's fine, but I think that could have had a much greater weight. And it feels like the show, to me, it felt like they were trying to take away from the beauty of that moment to then cut to a happy ending, or the happy ending that they want, because that's what it feels like, that the writers are saying, no, this is fine. It's okay, because look, he has Robin now. But if the audience is still kind of upset about this tragedy of someone who was looking for love for so many years and then loses that love and ends up with 2 kids who he has to raise by himself, it's like, well, it's fine. But he has Robin. But no one, I don't know. At that point, it's like, I don't care. That's terribly depressing. I want to focus on that. That seems to be more interesting to me. Another thing that kind of bothers me about the ending is the tone of the last 2 episodes. Typically, a sitcom, even with an ending, tends to be bittersweet because all the characters are saying goodbye to each other, so it's bittersweet. But in this case, it's more than just bittersweet. It just seems sad, and everything has like a depressing tone to it. And this takes me to a common comment that I've seen, which is that Ted and Robin got what they wanted before they got together, and that is the point. That Ted got his wife and family, his kids, and once he accomplished that, then he could move on to Robin. And from Robin's end, that she got the career that she wanted. She accomplished her goal. And then once she has already achieved all these dreams, she could be with Ted. But it doesn't feel like that's how the last episode is presenting it. The way that the show is presenting it, to me, almost feels like a revenge fantasy. And I know that's not what the writers intended, because what we're seeing is Ted is extremely happy. He gets everything that he wants. He has the perfect woman. He's so happy with her, and he's still friends with everyone that he knows, and he's getting his happy ending. And from Robin's side, all we see is just sadness and one bad event after the other. She may have had great things happening in her career, but that's not what we're being shown. What the show provides us is Robin fighting with Barney when they're brought on assignment. So we don't get to see her enjoying her work. We see her marriage fall apart, and we see her very sad about it. We also see them mentioning it. And the whole last episode, and I think last 2 episodes, we don't get to see Robin happy at all. And how long did she get to enjoy her career for? How much time did she get to be happy in it? And she could have been, but the writers didn't want to show us that. What we got to see is Ted being happy and Robin being sad for years that her marriage fell apart and she kind of settled into her career. And in the deleted scene, which I think, again, some people don't accept as canon, I think I kind of do. So we get this conversation where Robin is talking about her career, but she also says that she kind of wishes she could go back.
I'm happy with my life. Got my face on a bus, but does anyone ever get to this age and not wonder what could be different?
Perhaps it's the kind of thing where she got what she wanted, but she didn't really want it. And she's already at this point of being done with her career when Penny, Ted's daughter, is still pretty young. I mean, I can't tell sometimes people's ages or kids' ages, but she looks like she's about 6 or 5. So Robin has reached the point where she's done everything in her career, and she seems like she's already been kind of regretting her decision with Ted for years. So what we're seeing is Ted being abundantly happy and Robin regretting her life choices. So to me, it almost feels like the tone is, remember that girl who would put you to the side for years and would friend zone you for years? Well, she's gonna regret marrying that jerk guy and she's gonna wish that she was with you, but you in the meantime will get to be happy with your beautiful ending and your perfect partner, and she's gonna wish that she got to be with you, and then at the very end you'll get her anyway. So Ted gets the best of both worlds, but it seems like Robin is being punished, and I can't emphasize this enough. I know the writers didn't intend this, but it really feels that way based on how they're presenting Robin's story. They're not presenting any hope or happiness or any success for her in the last 2 episodes and all the flash forwards. And it feels like the writers wanted to present this type of narrative all along. If we go back to season 1, and I mentioned that scene where Ted pictures him getting married to a mystery woman and Robin sitting and crying in the bleachers. And it feels like that's what they're trying to recreate, that Ted is going to get married and he's going to be happy and Robin is going to be very sad. And we kind of get a repetition of that when it comes to Stella's wedding. So when Ted is marrying Stella, we see Robin showing up and telling him not to get married, and then later we find out that she was sad about the fact that Ted was going to marry Stella, and that's why she left for Japan. And we see that Robin quit her job in Japan, so it's another one of those things where when she got the job, she realized she didn't want it and she wanted to go back home. So there's this theme playing out that Robin is going to regret her choices and Ted is going to get what he wants. So yeah, so that's the thought that popped into my head. I really don't think the writers were going for that direction, but it just kind of felt that way because I couldn't really understand why they wanted to make Robin so depressed. And if the writers really wanted to present this narrative that both people got what they wanted and it's a reunion later in life where they're both happy, then I think they would have presented that. Of course, we have to consider the fact that Ted is presenting the story, and likely Ted would present the story in this way, that Robin is immensely sad and Robin is pining for him for years. I mean, at this point, I think we have to presume that Ted is still telling the story to his kids in the flash forwards. Perhaps, I don't know. But Ted would present it as Robin still wants me and she's so happy when we finally get together, although at the very end, what we're supposed to be seeing is real life. So I would love to know what people think of this particular thought. And now moving on to the analysis. With respect to Ted and Robin, I think it's kind of curious how they presented the relationship from the beginning. And I'll be honest, I didn't know that the show was trying to set Ted and Robin up as the will they, won't they couple of the entire show. because of how they present Ted in the beginning, how they present their relationship, but I guess that's on me. I just didn't see it. So with respect to Ted and Robin, I like to divide it into 3 sections: before they start dating, when they date, and after the relationship. My biggest qualm with Ted and Robin is before they start dating, because I have a lot of trouble with Ted's behavior, and I just don't believe Ted. I don't believe Ted when he's pursuing Robin because his behavior is not matching the reality. Like I mentioned before, their date and their interactions don't warrant Ted's outlandish behavior. The connection that they've had don't demonstrate the fact that he truly fell in love, because he didn't. He became infatuated with her, and the way that he's pursuing her doesn't comport with what he experienced. So I have trouble rooting for a couple where the situation is that they went on one date and the guy showing up in the middle of the night with a blue French horn and then coming back again that same night after he was already sent home. I think that's very unusual, to put it nicely. And then he chases her down to invite her to a party. So he shows up where she's working and he throws 3 parties for her. And again, he only went on one date with this woman. So how am I supposed to believe that this is a love story? Because what we're seeing is someone who's displaying very erratic, unhealthy behavior. And in the episode where Ted throws 3 party, the writers did take inspiration from The Great Gatsby. So this idea of throwing a party when Gatsby was throwing a party for Daisy to get her to show up. But the issue is that in The Great Gatsby, Gatsby knew Daisy. They were together at one point. They had a whole love story beforehand. And it's very, very different from Ted and Robin, who went on one single date. And so the premise of the start of their relationship doesn't make sense to me, because what I'm focused on is Ted's erratic behavior and the fact that it doesn't seem like he's actually looking at Robin or truly seeing her. Because what the narrative seems to be presenting is that Ted doesn't care who Robin truly is.
She loves lasagna.
Barf.
You know, I am sensing a pattern here.
When Robin says that she doesn't share the same interest as his ideal woman, and I'm not counting the pilot, he kind of disregards it. He still wants to be with her. So it seems like he's brushing off all of these things in the interest of her, and it makes you wonder, does he truly see Robin for who she is? Does he truly care about her for who she truly is? Because once the honeymoon phase is over and when reality sets in, would he still want to be with Robin? Or is he still going to look at her through whatever lens he wants to? And this is what troubles me the most about Ted in the first season, that if I were to be dating someone like Ted, I would always end up questioning whether or not the person truly cares about me, because it seems like the individual really cares about being in a relationship and they've decided to create an image, an idea of a person. They put this on the pedestal, but they're not even idealizing the individual in front of them. They're idealizing this concept of love and their concept of a perfect woman. And so they would never truly hear me, and I would never truly feel appreciated because I feel like I would never be looked at. And so before they start dating, I don't see evidence of them truly connecting in a way that demonstrates the fact that he appreciates Robin for who she is, and she appreciates him for who he is. So the biggest thing that's missing for me is the meat on the bones. If this was a side relationship, I wouldn't care as much, but because they're the focal point of the show, if the show decided that this is going to be the couple, then I want to see some substance when it comes to their interaction. So like I mentioned previously, we get the pilot and we get just a little bit of their date, which is not enough. I mean, it's cute and everything, but it's not enough to warrant his behavior, first of all, which is a red flag. But then after that, after the pilot, they had plenty of opportunity to get Ted and Robin to actually bond and connect. And I don't feel like we're getting those moments. We get a moment of them on the roof where we find out that Robin and Ted are not compatible. They end up kissing, but then they both realize that, look, we're looking for different things. We get another moment on the roof when Ted is waiting for the slutty pumpkin, but it's not really a connection between them of them truly bonding. And if this is the focal point of the couple, I need to understand why they fell in love with each other. I need to see why Ted is so obsessed with Robin, because for now, the way that the first season plays out, he's obsessed with an idea and not with the girl. And it feels like he's not listening to her. So when he finally decides to show up at her apartment, so he breaks in, he brings in the flowers, he brings in the string quartet, he brings in the chocolate, and so Mr. My Ideal Woman has to love dogs, doesn't even care enough to make sure the chocolate is away from the dogs, and then he really demands an answer.
I can't do this anymore. I need an answer.
He's the one who broke into her house. He's the one who put her into this position where she had a long day of work. She comes home tired and she has to pee, and he's demanding that she talk to him. And even though she asks for more time, he's like, that's not good enough. And when she says no, even though he said yes or no, tell me now, and she says no, he's like, well, I'm not going to care about that. I don't care. I'm still going to try. So it's like, well, what the hell was the point? What the hell was the point of you being so demanding and you saying, you have to tell me right now if it's a yes or a no. And if you got the answer, then accept the answer, but he wouldn't even accept it. And that to me doesn't feel like love. And that's why I have so much trouble rooting for Ted and Robin in the first season. Once Ted and Robin get together, I think that they're kind of okay. I think they're fine. So half the episodes we see that they're just being a couple and other issues are being addressed in the episode. And then other times we do get to see some conflict between them or some moments of connection. And in both cases, I think that the show addresses it pretty well. So when it comes to their conflicts, a lot of them do end up being resolved. And we see that either Ted comes around or Robin comes around. And when it comes to most of their conflicts, it usually has to deal with Robin's readiness to be in a relationship. So one would imagine that after the show ends or by season 9, she has overcome a lot of these things. So one thing is about living with somebody, but by the end, we do see that Robin is ready and willing to get married, and she is ready and willing to live with somebody. And she does become a lot more open, and she does become the kind of individual who's gone through these milestones of saying I love you or going through, experiences with another individual or with opening up and sharing. So all these things naturally through Robin's growth on the show would be resolved. And of course, there are some conflicts that don't get resolved, but overall, I think they're fine. What's missing for me, I think personally, is the thing that was missing for me in the first season. And I think maybe perhaps I'm putting too high of a bar on the relationship because I think I have different expectations for a central couple of a show versus kind of a background couple. So taking another couple from the show, Marshall and Lily. It's established from the beginning that Marshall and Lily are together. They get engaged in the pilot. And I didn't really start to get into them as a couple or buy them as a couple until the episode Zip, 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 which is where they're both locked in the bathroom while Victoria and Ted are looking romantically into each other's eyes. And that was the episode for me that cemented Marshall and Lily's relationship. Because up to this point, we just have this understanding that they're together. And then in that episode, what we see is them connecting over a variety of things. They're already an established couple, but we see how aligned they are and how much of a team they are when they're together, that both of them were trying to push each other to go on this getaway anniversary, which they didn't want to do because they kind of have the same thought as to how they should celebrate. They don't want to go to a bed and breakfast and travel all the way and to do this romantic thing. They want to stay home and they want to order food and they want to just go to bed in their own bed, and that's romantic for them. And when they're locked in the bathroom, we see how they're bonding and mocking Ted and Victoria, and just how much experience they've had together and how much they agree with each other. And it was that episode that kind of made me think about them as truly a couple that works despite all of their issues, and they do have issues. But I feel like we don't really get the same thing with Ted and Robin. So we get the episode where Robin tells Ted, I love you, but it's all kind of coming from the perspective of her appreciating Ted. And I feel like what I wanted to see is them just as a team having fun. And what the show presents us is things like Ted's parents, who ended up breaking up, getting divorced, because they had different ideals, that they wanted different things. And I feel like it's an interesting choice to decide to make Ted and Robin the final couple when they're presenting a narrative of Ted's parents, that they were friends, that they had fundamental differences, and that they still continue to be friends later in life. And even though both people reached their goals, they still decided to go their separate way. So to sum up, when it comes to Ted and Robin when they're together, I think that in general, they were pretty good because I think the show established a foundation of friendship and the fact that they worked on resolving their issues, of course, wasn't perfect. So for example, for the fact that Ted didn't get rid of his ex's stuff. So Mr. I will open up my vein and bleed out the locket, that he's happy to do to make Robin smile, but getting rid of his ex's stuff, like that's a little too much. And of course, I think this kind of gives this impression, and I think this happens in reality, that you would do anything for a person when you don't have them. When you don't have something, when you're afraid of losing something, you're going to try a lot harder. But when you do have it, the story changes a little bit, and I doubt he'll be bleeding out a locket. After Ted and Robin break up, it feels like the show is kind of inconsistent, or it flips back and forth as to how they feel about each other. So on the one hand, we do get a few moments where they backslide, where they sleep together again, and we get moments like Robin telling Ted not to get married at Stella's wedding. We get moments like Ted telling Robin that he loves her, or him him doing the whole Christmas decoration for her. But on the other hand, we get moments like Ted telling Barney that he could go for Robin, Ted helping out Barney to teach him more about being in a relationship. He's being very supportive and a good friend to Barney, even though Ted is supposed to love Robin. We also get moments like when Ted wants Robin to move out as his roommate because he's annoyed that she's putting empty milk bottles back into the fridge. So if he loves her so much and he wants to be around her, why is there the joke of the fact that he is annoyed and he wants her to move out? And then there's also the moment when we find out that when they were dating, Robin was flirting with a guy at a store, and then she pictured him while sleeping with Ted. And I just feel like if this is the love story that the show wants to present to us, that this is the will they won't they couple and we want to root for them for the end, if she's picturing another guy while sleeping with Ted, and Ted is sort of swayed by the sales associate who is also flirty with him, then what kind of a love story is this? And what kind of a love story is this if Robin is annoyed with the fact that she has to pretend to date Ted? And honestly, knowing the ending of the fact that Ted and Robin are supposed to still like each other at the very end, I think looking back, it creates some weirdness watching some scenes, like when Ted and Robin are living together and Robin starts sleeping with his assistant. And just all of these moments where would have been fine as friends and I think are kind of funny and cute as friends just have a weird lens on them if we consider what the writers are telling us, that they have loved each other throughout the whole time. And so all these times that they're dating other people, sleeping with other people, right then when they're living together, that they had feelings for each other during that time, just makes it a little weird. And we also have moments which are played off as romantic, but I feel are a little odd given the context of how vulnerable Robin is. So for example, when Robin breaks up with Don, she goes to Ted asking if she can move in, and she's very upset and she almost kisses him. And Ted is not doing that much to stop it, but Robin is just in a weird place. I mean, she just went through a breakup with a guy that she was ready to put her career on hold for and let go of her friends for, and that ends and she's very upset. And I feel like that's not the moment that they should be trying to bring back Ted and Robin, because that's just not the right time. And similarly, when Kevin breaks his engagement with Robin and she's incredibly upset, she's crying, and that's when Ted decides to tell her that he loves her. And again, also a very, very inappropriate time. She's in a vulnerable position. This is not the time to bring back the love story of Ted and Robin. And in their dynamic, we do see several moments where they're kind of saying things to each other, which I think the writers are trying to convey that they really like each other, but it always feels like it happens at the wrong time. So for example, when Robin shows up at Stella's wedding, I think that what she's saying, if she truly cares for Ted, it's incredibly inappropriate. I mean, telling the guy that's about to get married that you consider that, you know, he's your backup, or at least that's how it comes off, is just not the right time. So what she tells him is just not appropriate for that moment, telling him that perhaps there's still some feeling there, that she always thought that perhaps they would get married if she ever changed her mind, and that he shouldn't get married. I just think that that's not the time to bring those things up. And then cutting to Robin's wedding, I feel like Ted was out of line, or he was taking it way too far by sharing his feelings to Robin, I think the day of the wedding. That night that they're walking, that's the night that Robin is supposed to marry Barney, and Ted is telling her that there's only a top one and that he ended his relationship with Victoria for Robin. And even if he thinks that Robin doesn't care, that's not the time to mention it. The woman is about to get married, and you saw that she has doubts about the marriage. And so why bring this up? I think it's incredibly inappropriate. And how much do you love this person if you're saying all these things, unless you are truly concerned for the fact that she's leading down a really, really bad path with Barney? And in which case, bring it up beforehand. And then on Robin's end, when she's in her dress about to get married, that's when she's telling Ted that she should be with him. And that's also incredibly inappropriate. So you're telling the guy that's been going after you for years, he's told you that he loves you, and now you're about to marry one of his best friends, and that's when you decide to tell him that you should be with him. And I think that's so much weight and pressure to put on another person. It's also unfair. So to me, it feels like they're being unfair to each other. And the other thing that I want to talk about with respect to their relationship after they break up is what the show presents about Ted and what he's looking for in a relationship. So in the episode where Ted goes out on a date with Jen, the girl that he went on a blind date with 7 years prior and then 7 years ahead, And at the end, Ted explains what he's looking for, and he says that there's a reason why he never reached out to Jen.
I like finding typos in menus.
What?
And I know my shellfish pun is stupid, but the truth is, I'm not suddenly going to stop making stupid jokes.
And he wants someone who appreciates and accepts his quirks and his qualities. And it seems like that's who Tracy is. She is that type of woman who enjoys his long stories, who laughs at his silly jokes, and who doesn't mind that he might point out typos or she might find it quirky and cute. But the show doesn't present Robin in that way. And the show does present Ted and Robin as friends who have fun together and who kind of have jokes and enjoy each other's company. But the show doesn't really seem to present Robin as someone who is aligned on Ted's interest. That she would be someone who would sit there and listen to his long stories or him talk about Ted Roosevelt. She seems to be in the friend group that kind of mock Ted for when he decides to be long-winded or when he decides to correct people or when he has his silly little dad jokes. So when we look into the future, is Robin presented as someone who would sit with Ted and watch Woodsworth Manor? I think that's the name of the show. Or would she run away and make fun of him for the show? Is she someone who would enjoy his long stories, or would she tolerate it or put up with it?
I mean, shouldn't we hold out for the person who doesn't just tolerate our little quirks, but actually kind of likes them?
So throughout the show and after they break up, we see kind of little examples of how they work as friends, but it's not what Ted is specifically looking for if we take the example of his date with Jen and how Tracy is presented. For example, Robin seems to be more independent than what Ted is looking for in a partner. He wants to be in a relationship where he feels needed, and he doesn't get that as much with Robin, or he didn't get that as much. Ted loves the idea of getting older and doing old man things, and Robin has a greater admiration and appreciation for the youthfulness of life.
There's something admirable about the way Barney wants to stay young at heart. I mean, who wants to get old?
This guy.
And we also see that Ted even bonds with Zoey over the idea of getting old, but we don't see that with Robin. We don't see Robin loving movies like Field of Dreams. We don't see that she's so particular about Star Wars. We're not really seeing kind of common interests, and I know those are more shallow, but we also kind of don't see some of the deeper stuff, like appreciating stories, and she's fine with it, but is the type of person that would be his ideal. And in life, we don't really get ideals at the end of it. I think it's who you find and you make it work with that is going to be your ideal. But for a show like How I Met Your Mother, it feels like the story is pushing this narrative of a perfect person or a soulmate and all these concepts of love. And it is quite interesting that they decided to go with Robin when they spend time showing all these qualities that make her different from who he's looking for.
That was so sweet.
So romantic.
Little cheesy. Oh, Ted, you're such a good guy.
That was really nice.
Also a little cheesy.
And in real life, there's no ideal person. I think the ideal person is whoever you decide to really make it work with, who's a kind individual. But with respect to this show, I think it does kind of push a certain narrative about idealized love. And at the end of the day, Ted had to grow himself and had to understand that, love takes work and you can't force it, you can't push it. And I have seen people say that when it comes to the ending of Ted and Robin, the point is that even if you have your first love, it doesn't mean that's where the story ends. There's always the opportunity for a second love that, this is real life. A relationship may end, people may die, and you may not always have your perfect person by your side for the rest of your life. Doesn't mean that you can't move on. And that is a beautiful message, but the way that they structure the last season and the last 2 episodes, that's not what the show seems to be presenting because of how they offer the story. Because in order to get that second love and to get that maturity, I want to see the mature Ted and the mature Robin have the relationship to see if they are compatible. Because the show seems to be going back in time, a time when Ted was unhinged, when his behavior was erratic, when he didn't really understand what love is, and when I didn't believe him and didn't trust him, because Ted is also the guy who's telling Jeannette that he's falling in love with her.
I'm gonna send Lily a dead animal in the mail.
I think I'm falling for you.
He's the guy who's going back to Karen after she cheated on him multiple times, and when he's not listening to his friends when they say, don't go back to Karen, and he's like, no, I want to be with her. Ted is the guy who's pursuing relationships that are unhealthy for him, and he's saying I love you to individuals where you question whether or not it's in fact love, and he keeps pushing for these certain relationships. I mean, he's the one who tried to get Jeannette back after she broke up with him. This is the Ted that we're talking about. So this backstory of Ted's behavior and the way that he perceived love and how he was acting towards women, that's not the story that I want to give credibility to. So that's not the foundation that I need to understand that this is a true love story. When I look at the ending, it kind of feels like we get to see so much growth in Ted by the end. I mean, he has a lot of steps back, but at least at the very end, ending with Jeannette, and then meeting Tracy and how he's a lot more subdued, we could say, okay, he has sort of understood things, he's gotten better, and look at him acting so much more mature and so much calmer. And then we cut forward years, and it feels like the writers are like, no, let's bring back the crazy. Let him show up with a blue French horn. Let's not show the years of Ted and Robin reconnecting in their older selves at a point where Ted has a more stable idea of love, and where Robin is a lot more accepting and welcoming of relationships. But the way that they structure the last few episodes in last season, it feels like they're not trying to do that. And they could have been. It could have been that message, and it could have been the theme that they were going for, but they're not playing it out in the way that conveys that message. Instead of seeing mature Ted and mature Robin getting together and appreciating each other when they're older and appreciating their differences and their similarities, what we're getting is just a speed run of Tracy and Ted's relationship, and then one scene with Ted and Robin. And to me, it doesn't feel like progress, but rather a regression. We're going back to the old Ted with the blue French horn. It doesn't show a progression of who he is as a character. It feels like they're trying to bring him back to the very beginning.